She sat across from the man who once owned every breath she took, wearing a dress worth more than his silence. And when he reached for her hand like he still had the right, she pulled it back and smiled. "You lost that privilege the night you stopped looking at me." The room went quiet. A mafia boss, humiliated. No screaming, no tears, just a woman who built an empire from the ashes he left behind. If you want to see how Isabella Rossi vanished and came back as someone he couldn't touch, stay with me until the very end. Hit that like button and drop the name of the city you're watching from in the comments so I can see how far this story travels tonight. The rain came down on Verano City the way it always did in late October. Slow at first, polite almost, then heavier, turning the streets into black glass that caught every street lamp like a wound. Isabella Moretti stood at the tall window on the third floor of the Moretti estate. Her fingers pressed flat against the cold pane and watched a pair of headlights crawl up the long gravel drive. She didn't move. She hadn't moved in almost 20 minutes. The housekeeper had come and gone twice, the first time to ask about dinner, the second time to say nothing at all. Just to look at her with those careful Italian eyes that knew too much and said too little. The car stopped. A driver got out, opened the back door, and Dante Moretti stepped into the rain without hurrying. He never hurried. Hurrying was for men who were afraid of something, and Dante Moretti was not afraid of anything in Verano City. Not the rain, not the federal investigators, not the rival families who sent men to watch his house at night and then sent more men to collect the bodies of the first ones. Isabella watched him walk up the steps. Even from 3 floors up, she could see the way his coat hung on him, the way his shoulders sat, the way his mouth had that faint downward pull that used to mean he'd had a bad day and wanted her to pour him something strong and sit on the arm of his chair and tell him a joke until he laughed. That had been a long time ago. She couldn't remember the last time he'd laughed. She couldn't remember the last time she had either. She turned from the window. The bedroom was enormous. It had been designed by a man from Milan who charged more for a consultation than most people earned in a year, and every piece of furniture in it had been chosen without her. The bed was a 4-poster in dark walnut. The rug was some kind of silk. The chandelier above her head had 84 crystals. She'd counted once during a night when she couldn't sleep, and Dante hadn't come home, and she couldn't think of anything else to do. 84 crystals. She'd counted them 3 times to be sure. Her reflection in this vanity mirror was a stranger. A woman of 31 with the posture of someone 50, hair pulled back too tight, a pearl necklace Dante had given her on their 2nd anniversary, lipstick she hadn't wanted to put on but had put on anyway because he liked it. Her eyes had the flat, polished look of river stones. Somewhere underneath, there had once been a girl who painted on the kitchen floor of a little apartment in the Corso district, but that girl had drowned slowly over 5 years of marriage, and Isabella wasn't sure anymore which version of her had died first. She heard the front door open downstairs, heard his voice, low, sharp, Italian, saying something to one of the men in the foyer. Heard the man answer, heard Dante cut him off. "Not tonight, Marco. Whatever it is, not tonight." Footsteps on the marble. Then on the stairs. Isabella sat down on the edge of the bed and waited. He came in without knocking. He never knocked. It was his house. "You're still dressed," he said, loosening his tie with one hand. "I told Renata to have you ready at 7. It's 7:12. Don't." He didn't look at her when he said it. He was already halfway across the room, heading for the walk-in closet, dropping his cufflinks into a small crystal dish on the dresser as he went. The sound they made hitting the glass was like 2 small bones. "There's a dinner," he said from inside the closet. "Carraro's people. I need you downstairs in 15 minutes. "You didn't tell me. I'm telling you now." She stood up slowly. "Dante?" 15 minutes, Isabella." She walked to the closet doorway. He was standing in front of a row of suits, his back to her, unbuttoning his shirt. In the mirror on the closet wall, she could see his face. Tired, unshaven, a small cut on his jaw from something she hadn't asked about and wouldn't. "I've been sick all day," she said. "I told Renata this morning. Take something." "I did." It didn't help. He pulled the shirt off, tossed it onto the chair in the corner. "Then take something stronger." She didn't answer. She just stood there in the doorway, in the silk dress he hadn't chosen and didn't notice, and watched him pick a new shirt from the rack. He was still a beautiful man. That was the worst part. 41 years old, 6 feet of dark hair and sharp bones, and eyes the color of wet coffee. And when he walked into a room, every woman in it found something else to look at, because looking directly at him felt dangerous. She remembered the first time she'd seen him, a gallery opening, 10 years ago. She was 21, showing 3 small paintings in a group exhibition, and he'd walked in with 2 men in black coats and bought all 3 without asking the price. Then he'd asked the gallery owner for her phone number. The gallery owner had given it to him. Nobody said no to Dante Moretti, even then. "Dante," she said again. He looked at her in the mirror. "What?" "Who's going to be there tonight?" "Carraro. 2 of his capos. Your presence is required." "Required." "Yes." "For what?" He turned around. He had that expression now. The one that used to mean he was about to say something cruel and pretend he hadn't meant it. "For what I say it's required for, Isabella. Get dressed." "I am dressed." He looked at her. Really looked, for the first time since he'd walked in. His eyes moved down the silk dress, over the pearls, back up to her face. Something crossed his expression. She couldn't tell what. Annoyance, maybe. Or something sadder. It was gone before she could name it. "Wear the black one, Matt," he said. "The one from Paris. And put your hair down." "I don't want to—" "Isabella." She stopped. He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the rain on him and the cologne underneath it. The cologne he'd worn since the first year they were married. The one she used to buy for him in bulk from a shop in the Corso, back when she still knew what he wanted. "You will put on the black dress," he said quietly. "You will come downstairs. You will smile at Carraro. You will laugh at his jokes. You will be the wife of Dante Moretti for 2 hours, and then you can come back up here and be whatever you want. Understood?" She didn't answer. He reached up and touched her jaw with one finger. It wasn't affection. It was the way a man adjusts a piece of furniture. "Understood, Isabella?" "Yes." "Good." He walked past her, back into the bedroom. She stayed in the closet for a long moment, breathing very carefully through her nose, because she had learned a long time ago that if she breathed through her mouth, she might say something, and if she said something, he might answer, and if he answered, it would be worse. She wore the black dress. She put her hair down. She came downstairs at 7:26 and found Dante in the drawing room with a glass of whiskey in his hand and a woman Isabella had never seen before sitting on the arm of the couch beside him. The woman was young, 23, maybe. Blonde, not the kind of blonde that came out of a bottle. The expensive kind. The kind that took 3 appointments at a salon in the piazza and a stylist who didn't take new clients. She was wearing a red dress so tight it looked painted on and heels Isabella couldn't have walked in on a dare. She was laughing at something Dante had said, and her hand was resting on his knee in a way that wasn't new. It was a hand that had been there before, many times. Isabella stopped in the doorway. Dante saw her. He didn't move the woman's hand. He didn't stand up. He just raised his glass an inch in her direction and said, "Isabella, this is Vittoria. She'll be joining us tonight." Vittoria turned her head. She had the kind of face that was used to being looked at. She smiled at Isabella, a smile that was half politeness and half something much colder. "Mrs. Moretti," she said, "I've heard so much." Isabella didn't answer. She walked to the bar cart. She poured herself 2 fingers of whiskey she didn't want. She drank it in one swallow, set the glass down carefully on the marble, and said, without turning around, "Dante, a word." "We don't have time." "A word." Something in her voice must have been different, because he stood up. Vittoria's hand slid off his knee and landed on the couch cushion like a dropped glove. "Hallway," Isabella said, and walked out without waiting. In the hallway, under the painting of the hunting dogs that she had hated since the day it was hung, she turned to face him. "Who is she?" "Nobody." "Dante." "She's a friend of Carraro's nephew. She's here for the dinner, that's all." "She had her hand on your leg." "Isabella." "She had her hand on your leg, Dante. In my house, in my drawing room." He looked at her for a long second, then he laughed. A short, ugly sound, barely a laugh at all. "Your house," he said. "What?" "Nothing." "No, say it." He stepped closer. He was taller than her by half a foot, and she had to tilt her head back to keep looking at him, and she hated that. She had always hated that, the way the architecture of him required her to look up. "This is my house, Isabella," he said softly. "Everything in it is mine. The paintings, the furniture, the chandelier you like to count, the dress you're wearing, the pearls around your neck. All of it, mine." He tilted his head slightly. "Including you." She didn't move. "Now," he said, "we have guests. You are going to go back in there, and you are going to smile, and you are going to be polite to Vittoria because she is my guest tonight. And if you embarrass me in front of Carraro, I will not forgive you for it. Do you understand me?" The whiskey was burning in her chest. Or maybe it wasn't the whiskey. "Do you understand me, Isabella?" "Yes," she said. "Good girl." He turned and walked back into the drawing room. She stood in the hallway under the hunting dogs for what felt like a very long time. She could hear him in there, laughing at something Vittoria said. She could hear Vittoria's voice, bright and young and careless. She looked down at the pearl necklace. She could feel each individual pearl against her throat, cold and heavy. She thought about undoing the clasp, letting the whole thing fall on the marble floor. She thought about how small a sound they would make. She didn't do it. She went back into the drawing room and smiled at Vittoria, and when Carraro arrived 20 minutes later, she laughed at his jokes. And when his capo asked her where she was from, she said, "Corso," in a voice so pleasant and light that even she couldn't tell she was lying. Chokam. Dinner went until almost midnight. Vittoria sat on Dante's left. Isabella sat on his right. Vittoria touched his wrist 3 times during dessert. Isabella counted. When the guests finally left, Isabella stood in the foyer and watched the heavy front door close behind Carraro, and she thought, "I cannot do this anymore. I cannot do one more day of this." She didn't cry. She hadn't cried in almost 2 years. The crying had stopped the same month she'd stopped painting, and she had never quite worked out which had caused which. Dante came up behind her. She could smell the wine on him. "You did well tonight." "Thank you." "Carraro likes you." "Good. Come to bed." "I'm not tired." "Isabella." "I'm not tired, Dante. Go to bed. I'll be up in a while." And he looked at her. For a moment she thought he might say something real, something that belonged to one of the 2 people they used to be a long time ago, in a little apartment in the Corso with paint on the kitchen floor. But he just nodded, turned, and walked up the stairs. Vittoria was still in the house. Isabella had watched her go up the back staircase an hour ago with her shoes in her hand, and nobody, not the housekeeper, not the driver, not the man who stood in the kitchen all night eating sandwiches and watching the monitors, had said a single word about it. Isabella stood in the foyer for a long time after Dante's footsteps faded. Then she went to the kitchen. The kitchen was empty at that hour. The cook had gone to bed. The lights were off, except for the small lamp above the stove that Renata always left burning for Dante, in case he came down hungry in the middle of the night. Isabella opened the drawer next to the stove and took out a small silver key. She had kept it there for 3 years. Nobody in the house knew she had it. She had made a copy herself from the spare on Dante's keyring in the basement of a locksmith in the old quarter who didn't ask questions and didn't remember faces. She walked down the back hallway, past the pantry, past the cellar door, to a small door at the end that led to what Dante called his reading room. He didn't read, not really. He kept ledgers there and a safe behind a painting of a bullfight, and he went in there once or twice a week and closed the door, and Isabella had never, in 5 years of marriage, been invited in. She unlocked the door. She went inside. The safe was behind the bullfight, exactly where she had always known it would be. She took the painting down, set it carefully against the wall, and stood looking at the black steel face of the safe for a long moment. She didn't know the combination. She had never known the combination. But she knew where Dante wrote it down because she had watched him once, a year ago, from the top of the stairs when he didn't know she was there. He had come out of the reading room with a small leather notebook in his hand, and he had walked to the library and put the notebook on the 3rd shelf from the bottom, behind a book called The Campaigns of Hannibal, which nobody in the house had ever read, including Dante, who had bought the library as a set from an estate sale in Rome. She went to the library. She took down The Campaigns of Hannibal. She opened the small leather notebook behind it. The combination was on the first page, written in Dante's narrow, careful handwriting, next to a small notation that said RR, which she assumed stood for reading room, because Dante labeled everything he owned, the way a man labels things when he doesn't trust anyone, including himself. She went back to the reading room. She opened the safe. Hut. Inside the safe, there was more money than Isabella had ever seen in one place in her life. Stacks of euros, stacks of American dollars, stacks of Swiss francs bound in bank wrappers. There was a passport with her photograph on it under a name that wasn't hers, Elena Ricci, which had confused her for only a second before she understood what it was, and who it had been made for, and what Dante had been planning to do with it if he ever needed to disappear her. She stood looking at the passport for a long time. Then she took it. She took one stack of euros, just one, because she wasn't a thief, she told herself. She was only taking what she needed, and the thought almost made her laugh out loud. She took a small envelope at the back of the safe that had her wedding ring in it, the ring Dante had given her at the ceremony in the cathedral 5 years ago, which she had stopped wearing 18 months ago, which he had taken off her vanity and locked away without asking her. She put the ring back in the envelope. She did not take it. She closed the safe. She put the painting back. She locked the reading room. She put the silver key back in the drawer next to the stove. Then she went upstairs. Dante was asleep. This bedroom smelled like his wine and his cologne, and faintly, very faintly, like a perfume that wasn't hers. She didn't look at him. She didn't need to. She went into the closet and she took off the black dress from Paris and laid it carefully on the chair, because even now, even at the very end of a marriage, there were habits she couldn't shake. She put on jeans and a sweater and a coat. She took a duffel bag from the top shelf, a bag she had bought 3 months ago in a shop in the Corso and hidden behind her winter boots. And she went to the bathroom and took only what she could not buy later: a photograph of her mother, a photograph of herself at 8 years old on a beach in Puglia, a small wooden box of her grandmother's rosary that she did not pray with but could not leave behind. The pearls she put on the vanity. The wedding band she had not worn in 18 months and did not need to remove. She left the Paris dress on the chair. She left the keys to the Mercedes on the dresser. She left her phone, which he had paid for, which he had probably been tracking for years. She stood in the bedroom doorway for one last second and looked at the man in the bed. His mouth was slightly open. He was snoring, very softly. He had never snored when they were first married. He had started 2 years in, and she had teased him about it at breakfast, and he had pretended to be offended, and she had kissed the corner of his mouth, and he had laughed. She couldn't remember the last time he had laughed. "Goodbye, Dante," she said very quietly, and he did not hear her, and she turned and walked out of the bedroom and down the stairs and out the side door by the kitchen, the one the delivery men used, the one she had watched for 3 weeks to figure out when the cameras did and did not cover. She walked down the driveway in the rain. She did not look back at the house. At the end of the driveway, she turned left, not right, because right went to the city and left went to the old highway, and there was a truck stop on the old highway where long-haul drivers coming in from Albania sometimes slept for an hour or two before pushing on toward the coast. She walked for 46 minutes. The rain did not stop. By the time she reached the truck stop, her coat was soaked through and her hair was plastered to her face, and her hands were shaking so hard she could barely hold the straps of the duffel bag. The truck stop diner had one customer at the counter and one waitress behind it. The waitress looked at her, looked at the coat, the wet hair, the duffel, and didn't say anything. "Coffee," Isabella said. The waitress poured her a cup. "There a bus that comes through here?" 3 in the morning, goes east." "How far east?" The waitress looked at her with tired, kind eyes. "As far as you want." Isabella drank the coffee. It was bad. It was the best coffee she had ever had in her life. Pashta. She bought the bus ticket in cash. She gave the driver the name Elena Ricci, because that was the name on the passport in her bag. And the driver didn't ask for any ID because it was 3 in the morning on a bus going east and nobody cared who she was. She sat in the back. She pressed her forehead against the cold window. The bus pulled out of the truck stop at 3:07, and Isabella watched the last lights of Verano City slide past in the rain, and she did not cry. She did not cry. She did not cry. And then at some point between Verano and wherever the bus was going, she did finally cry, and she put her hand over her mouth so the other passengers wouldn't hear her. And she cried for a long time. For the girl on the kitchen floor with the paint and the laughing husband and the apartment in the Corso, and for the woman who had counted 84 crystals in a chandelier that did not belong to her, and for everything in between that she was still too tired to name. When she stopped crying, it was almost dawn. She looked at her reflection in the bus window. The pearls were gone. The lipstick was gone. Her hair was a disaster. Her eyes were swollen. She looked, she thought, like a stranger. She looked, she thought, like herself. Dante Moretti woke up at 7:14 in the morning to an empty bed and a bedroom that smelled faintly wrong. Too clean, too still, too much like nobody had been in it. He sat up slowly. Isabella? No answer. Isabella. He got out of bed. He walked into the bathroom. Her toothbrush was gone. Her hairbrush was gone. The small wooden box she kept on the counter, the one with the rosary he had teased her about once, because she wasn't religious and neither was he, that was gone too. He walked back into the bedroom. The pearls were on the vanity. The wedding band was in the little glass dish where it had been for 18 months. The Paris dress was on the chair, folded with the kind of care that told him, with a sudden cold certainty he would remember for the rest of his life, that she had folded it because she was never going to wear it again. Renata! The housekeeper came running. Where's my wife? I don't know, Mr. Moretti. I haven't seen her since... Find her. Yes, sir. Find her, Renata. Now. Renata ran. Dante stood in the middle of the bedroom in his pajama pants and his bare feet, and he looked at the Paris dress on the chair, and he looked at the pearls on the vanity, and for the first time in many years, Dante Moretti felt something he did not have a name for, because he had not allowed himself to feel it in so long that the word for it had fallen out of his vocabulary the way a coin falls out of a pocket through a hole the owner did not know was there. He walked to the window. He looked down at the driveway. The Mercedes was still parked where the driver had left it. Her keys, he would find in a minute, were on the dresser. Her phone, he would find in a minute more, was on the nightstand, dark and silent. She had walked out of his house in the rain. She had walked out of his house in the rain, and she had not taken the car, and she had not taken the phone, and she had not taken the jewelry, and she had not taken any of the things he had given her, which meant, he understood this very slowly, standing at the window in his bare feet, that she had not left him the way women left men. She had left him the way a prisoner leaves a cell. He put his hand flat against the cold glass of the window, the same window his wife had pressed her hand against the night before while he was getting out of a car in the rain. And he stood there for a long time, breathing. And he did not know that he was doing it, but he was breathing in exactly the same rhythm she had been breathing the night before, which was the rhythm of a person trying very hard not to scream. Downstairs in the drawing room, Vittoria came down the back staircase in a silk robe that did not belong to her and asked, in a sleepy voice, where Dante had gone. Renata, who was on her way to the garage to check the cameras, stopped in the hallway and looked at Vittoria with an expression that Vittoria had never seen on the housekeeper's face before, and did not know how to read. "Mrs. Moretti is gone," Renata said. Vittoria blinked. "What?" "Mrs. Moretti," Renata said again, very slowly, "is gone. And if I were you, I would put on real clothes and leave this house before Mr. Moretti comes downstairs, because something is about to happen in this house that you do not want to be part of." Vittoria stared at her. Renata walked past her without another word. Upstairs, Dante was still at the window. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. The sun was coming up over Verano City, pale and thin and orange, and somewhere on a bus going east, a woman whose name was no longer Isabella Moretti was asleep with her forehead against the glass, dreaming, for the first time in 5 years, of the color blue. She had not decided yet what she was going to paint. She had decided only that she was going to paint again, and that was enough, for now, to carry her the rest of the way to wherever the bus was going. The bus let her off in a town called Porto Serra at 11 minutes past 9 in the morning, and Isabella, who was not Isabella anymore but had not yet figured out how to be Elena either, stood on the sidewalk with her duffel bag at her feet and tried to remember how to be a person who made her own decisions. Porto Serra was not a glamorous place. It was a mid-sized port city on the eastern coast, the kind of place that had money but kept it quiet, with narrow streets and old buildings the color of faded apricots, and a waterfront that smelled like diesel and fish and salt. It was 400 miles from Verano City. It was not far enough. Nowhere would be far enough for the first year, She would learn that soon. But for now it was a sidewalk she was standing on, and a sun she was standing under. And that was the whole of the world for about 90 seconds while she stood there blinking. She picked up the duffel bag. She walked. She did not know where she was walking. She passed a bakery that was putting out trays of small almond cookies in the window. She passed a flower seller arguing with a woman about the price of lilies. She passed a barber shop with a red and white pole turning slowly in the morning light, and an old man sitting inside getting his chin shaved, and for a moment she envied him so fiercely she almost stopped walking, because his life right now was so small and so simple and so entirely his own. She found a pensione 3 streets off the waterfront. The sign in the window said, "Rooms by the week, cash preferred." The woman behind the desk was somewhere between 50 and 70, with dyed black hair pulled up in a clip and reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She did not smile when Isabella walked in. She did not stop smiling either. Her face was the face of a woman who had rented rooms to a lot of people and had stopped making assumptions about any of them decades ago. "How long?" the woman said. "A month, maybe more. 200 a week, cash. No men in the room after 10. No cooking. Bathroom is down the hall." "That's fine." "Name." Isabella put the passport on the counter and slid it across. She did not open it. She did not need to. The woman looked at the name without looking at the photograph, wrote Elena Ricci in a ledger with a blue ballpoint pen, and slid the passport back. "Room 4, up the stairs, second door on the left." "Thank you. Breakfast is from 7 to 9. If you miss it, you miss it. Thank you." The woman looked at her then, really looked. The way Renata had looked at her the night before when Renata had asked about dinner. There was something in the look that wasn't quite pity, and wasn't quite curiosity, and wasn't quite anything you could name. It was the look of one woman seeing another woman who had walked out of something and knowing not to ask. "There's a key on this hook by the door," the woman said. "Don't lose it. I charge for the locksmith. I won't lose it." "They all say that." Isabella took the key. She walked up the stairs. The carpet was the color of old coffee, and the banister was worn smooth by 100 years of hands. Room 4 had a door that stuck, and she had to push it with her shoulder. And when she finally got it open, the first thing she saw was a window. A small square window with white curtains, and beyond the curtains a patch of sky so blue it didn't look real. It was the same blue she had dreamed about on the bus. She dropped the duffel bag on the floor. She sat down on the edge of the narrow bed. For the first time in almost 6 years, there was nobody in the next room. There was nobody in the hallway. There was nobody downstairs listening to how long the shower ran. There was no driver sitting in a car outside waiting to take her to a lunch she did not want to attend. There was no phone on the nightstand that somebody else had paid for. There was no man in a suit in the kitchen eating sandwiches and watching monitors. There was a window. There was a bed. There was a key in her hand. She put her face in her hands, and she sat like that for a long time. And she did not cry because she had done all her crying on the bus. And what she felt now was something quieter and stranger, something that had no name, something that was not happiness, but was maybe the place happiness started from, if you were lucky, if you lived long enough. Eventually, she stood up. She walked to the window. She opened it. The air that came in smelled like salt and bread and somebody's cigarette 2 floors down. She breathed it in. Then she started counting the money. She had 4,200 euros in the duffel bag. She had thought it was more. She had thought, when she was standing in front of Dante's safe in the rain in the middle of the night, that 1 stack would be enough to buy her a year. It was not going to buy her a year. Not in a city, not even in a small city. 200 a week for the room was 800 a month, and she would need to eat, and she would need clothes that weren't the 2 things she had packed, and she would need supplies if she was going to paint, which was the whole point, and the math of it all did something uncomfortable to her chest. She was going to have to work. She had not worked for money in 6 years. Before Dante, she had painted for gallery shows and taught a weekend class to children at a community center in the Corso. And the money had been bad, but she had been 21, and it had been enough. She did not know what it was enough for now. She did not know what she was qualified to do. She did not know what a person with no references and a fake name and hands that shook every time she heard a car door slam outside could reasonably expect a stranger to pay her for. She lay down on the bed. She looked at the ceiling. There was a water stain in the corner shaped vaguely like a dog. She thought about Dante waking up. She thought about him walking into the bathroom. She thought about Renata's face when Renata figured out what had happened, and she thought about Renata keeping her mouth shut for exactly as long as Renata thought she could get away with it, which would not be very long because Dante was not a stupid man, and Dante would have the cameras pulled before breakfast. She closed her eyes. She told herself very quietly that she had made it through the night, which was the thing she had been most afraid of. And she could make it through the day too, and if she could make it through the day, she could make it through the week, and that was how it was going to have to work for a while because she could not think about the year or the month or even the end of the afternoon without her chest doing the thing it kept doing. She fell asleep. When she woke up, it was 4 in the afternoon and she was ravenously hungry, and she did not know what day it was. Downstairs, the woman at the desk was still there. Isabella realized with a little jolt that she did not know the woman's name. "Is there a place to eat near here?" "Marco's, 2 streets down toward the water. Tell him Katerina sent you. He'll give you the cheaper menu." "Thank you, Katerina." She walked out of the pensione into the slanted afternoon light of a coastal city she had never been to. And for the first 100 yards, her knees were shaking so badly she thought she might have to sit down on the curb, because this was the first time since she was 21 that she had walked down a street alone without somebody either following her or expecting her somewhere, and the freedom of it was so strange and so big that it was almost a kind of fear. But she didn't sit down on the curb. She kept walking. She found Marco's. She ate a bowl of pasta with oil and garlic and a glass of red wine that was not good wine but cost €3. The waiter was a teenager with a scar on his lip. He smiled at her once, quickly, and then went back to being a teenager. Nobody talked to her. Nobody asked her name. Nobody asked where her husband was. She paid. She walked back to the pensione. She locked the door of room 4 behind her. She stood with her back pressed against the door for a full minute, just listening to the building, to the pipes, to someone 2 rooms over laughing at a television show, to the shutters of the room below her opening and closing. And when she was satisfied that nobody was coming, she went to the bed and she took a small notebook out of the duffel bag and she started a list. "Things I can do," she wrote at the top of the page. Then she crossed it out and wrote, "Things I will do." 1. Find work. 2. Paint again. 3. Change my hair. 4. Don't go to galleries. 5. Don't go to restaurants where rich men eat. 6. Don't use the passport for anything important. 7. Save every euro that does not go to rent or food. 8. Do not call anyone from home. Not mama, not anyone. She looked at number 8 for a long time. Her mother had died 4 years ago, so there was no mama to call. But she wrote it anyway, because there was still an aunt, and there were still 2 cousins, and there was still a woman named Francesca who had been her best friend since childhood, and who had stood as her maid of honor at the cathedral in Verano City, and who had whispered to her an hour before the ceremony, "Isa, if you want to run, I will drive you to the airport right now and I will lie for a month." And Isabella had laughed and kissed her cheek and told her not to be silly. She did not laugh now thinking about it. She closed the notebook. She went to bed in her clothes. She slept for 10 hours and woke up to the sound of gulls. Back in Verano City, Dante Moretti had not slept. He had been downstairs in the drawing room since 6 in the morning, which was the room he went to when he wanted to think, because it was the room with the fewest windows. And he was sitting in the leather chair by the empty fireplace with the same glass of whiskey he had poured himself 4 hours earlier, which he had not drunk. Marco, the capo, stood across from him. Marco was 53 years old. He had been with Dante's father, and before that he had been with Dante's grandfather, and he was the only man in the organization that Dante did not lie to, because Marco had changed his diapers once, and both of them remembered it. "The cameras," Dante said. "The side door by the kitchen. 2:07 in the morning. She's wearing a coat and she's carrying a bag. She walks down the driveway. We lose her at the end of it. Which way did she turn?" "Left. Left is the old highway." "Yes. There's a truck stop on the old highway." "I sent Enzo." "And?" "The waitress remembers her. She had a coffee. She asked about the 3 a.m. bus east." Dante closed his eyes. "The 3 a.m. bus east goes to 5 cities, Dante. From each of those cities there are at least 10 connections. She could be anywhere." "I know where she could be, Marco." "Yes." "I want her found." "I know." "I want her found this week." Marco did not answer. Marco, who had known Dante since Dante was in diapers, had a particular way of not answering, which was to look somewhere slightly above Dante's left shoulder and wait. "What?" Dante said. "Nothing." Marco. "Nothing, Dante." "Say it." Marco looked at him finally. He had the kind of face that had been in a lot of weather, and his eyes were the color of a coin that had been in a pocket for a long time, and Dante had always slightly feared those eyes without ever admitting it to himself. "Why?" Marco said. "Why what?" "Why do you want her found?" "She's my wife." "Yes, she's my wife, Marco. She left in the middle of the night. She didn't tell me. She didn't leave a note. She took a passport out of my safe that I did not authorize her to have." "She took what?" "A passport, Elena Ricci. I made it for her 3 years ago." "Dante." "Don't." "Dante, you had a passport made for her 3 years ago and you never told her." "It was for her protection." "Was it?" Dante set the whiskey down on the small table next to the chair. The glass made a very precise sound against the wood. "Marco, if you have something to say to me, say it. I've known you 38 years. Yes. I loved your father. I love you like a son. Yes. You ran that girl into the ground, Dante. I watched you do it. I didn't say anything because it wasn't my business, and it wasn't my marriage, and she wasn't my wife. But I watched you do it, and so did everyone else in this house." Dante did not move. "She was 21 when you married her. She used to laugh. Do you remember the laugh she used to have, the one that made the dog start barking? I haven't heard that laugh in 4 years. I don't think she has either." "Marco, you brought Vittoria into the house last night, into the drawing room, with your wife sitting upstairs sick, in front of the staff, in front of Corrado." Marco's voice did not rise. He had not raised his voice at Dante since Dante was 13 years old. "You did that, Dante. That was you. I watched you do that." Dante looked at his hands. "I am not telling you not to look for her," Marco said. "I am telling you, as your friend, as the man who carried your father's casket, that if you find her and you bring her back here, there will be nothing left of her to bring back. She will die in this house. You will bury a woman who is already gone. And then you will be the man who buried his wife, and everything after that will be worse than what came before." The room was very quiet. After a long moment, Dante said, "I don't want to bring her back." "No?" "I want to know where she is." "Why?" "Because she is mine, Marco." Marco looked at him for a long time. Then Marco said, very quietly, "No, Dante, she isn't. That's what last night was. She isn't anymore." Dante picked up the whiskey. He drank it in one swallow. He set the glass down. "Find her." "Dante." "Find her, Marco." Marco waited. Then he nodded once, very slightly, and walked out of the drawing room without saying anything else, and Dante sat in the leather chair by the empty fireplace, and he looked at the empty glass on the small table, and he did not move for a very long time. Upstairs, Vittoria was packing. Renata, who had never liked Vittoria, stood in the doorway with her arms folded and watched Vittoria try to fit a pair of suede boots into a designer bag that had not been designed for suede boots. Vittoria was not crying. Vittoria was furious. Vittoria had not been told to leave, but Vittoria had come downstairs at 7:30 in the morning and had seen Dante's face in the drawing room, and Vittoria was not a stupid woman. And Vittoria understood that there was a very short window in which she could walk out of this house under her own power, and that window was closing. "Your driver is here," Renata said. "Tell him to wait." "He has waited. For an hour." "Tell him to wait longer." Renata did not answer. Renata just stood there in the doorway, arms folded, watching, and after another minute of trying to make the boots fit, Vittoria straightened up and turned around and looked at Renata and said, "What?" "Nothing, miss." "Don't call me miss. You're not my housekeeper." "No, miss." Vittoria's face did something unpleasant. "You think I did this?" "I don't think anything, miss." "You think I'm the reason she left?" "No, miss. I don't think that." "Then why are you looking at me like that?" Renata uncrossed her arms. She stepped into the room. She was 58 years old and she had worked for the Moretti family for 22 years, and she had buried her own husband 6 years earlier, and she had seen a lot of things in that house. and she did not have any interest in protecting anyone's feelings at this point in her life. "I am looking at you like that, miss, because you are not the reason she left. You are the reason she could finally go. There is a difference, and when Mr. Moretti figures out that difference, which he will, in about 10 days, you are not going to want to be in this city anymore. So I suggest you finish packing." Vittoria stared at her. Renata turned and walked out. Vittoria was out of the house in 20 minutes. In Porto Serra, Isabella walked into 17 shops on her third day in the city and asked for work. 16 of them said no. The 17th was a framing shop on a narrow street 2 blocks from the cathedral, owned by a man named Tommaso, who had a white beard and no wife and a limp he had gotten in the Navy in 1974. He needed someone to answer the phone and sweep the floor and handle customers when he was in the back gluing mats. And he did not need references because his last assistant had stolen from him, and references had not helped. €8 an hour, he said. Cash, no vacation, no sick days. If you steal from me, I will find out. I won't steal from you. They all say that. She started the next morning. The shop was called Tommaso Cornici. It smelled like wood glue and dust, and the particular smell of old paintings that have been leaning against each other in a back room for too long. There was a cat named Gino, who slept on a stool by the register. There was a radio behind the counter that Tommaso kept tuned to a station that played opera in the morning and soccer games in the afternoon. The work was easy. The work was easier than anything Isabella had done in a long time. On her 4th day at the shop, a woman came in with a canvas under her arm. The woman was small and round and Romanian, and her name was Mira, and she needed a frame for a painting she had done of her grandmother's kitchen. The painting was not good. The painting was in fact quite bad. The perspective was wrong. The colors were muddy. The grandmother's hands were the size of small boats. But the painting was alive. The painting had been made by someone who had wanted to make it, by someone who had stood in front of a canvas and put something on it because she needed to. And Isabella, standing behind the counter of the framing shop, felt something break loose in her chest that she had thought was lost. "It's beautiful," Isabella said, and meant it, because the grandmother's hands were too big, but they were clearly the hands of a woman who had fed a child, and the painting had been painted by someone who remembered being that child. "My husband says it's ugly," Mira said cheerfully. "He says it looks like I painted it with my feet, but I like it, so I frame it." "Good," Isabella said. "Good for you." That night she walked to an art supply store 6 blocks from the pensione. She stood outside for a long time before she went in. Inside, the smells were the smells of her childhood. Linseed oil and turpentine and raw canvas and the particular papery dust of pastels. She walked the aisles slowly. She picked up 1 tube of cadmium red and held it in her hand and almost put it down 3 times before she let herself walk to the register with it. She bought the tube of cadmium red, a tube of ultramarine blue, a tube of titanium white, 1 brush, and a small canvas, the smallest canvas they had, not much bigger than a book. She did not buy an easel. She did not buy anything she did not need. The whole purchase was €47. Walking back to the pensione with the small paper bag in her hand, she realized she was smiling. Her cheeks hurt with it, because it was the first time her face had done that in so long that the muscles had gotten out of practice. She passed a man selling flowers on the corner and she smiled at him, and he smiled back, and she understood, walking the last block, that she had spent 6 years in a very beautiful house with a very handsome man, and she had not smiled at a stranger once in all of it. She painted in room 4 that night, sitting on the floor with the canvas propped against the leg of the bed, and what she painted was terrible. It was genuinely terrible. It was a window with a curtain and a square of sky beyond the curtain, and the perspective was wrong, and the blue was not the blue she could see, and the white of the curtain looked flat and dead, and she stared at it for a long time when she was done, and she thought, very clearly, I have forgotten how to do this. And then she thought, good. Then I will learn again. She went to sleep with paint on her hands, because she had not bought turpentine, because turpentine had not been essential, and the paint was still on her hands in the morning, and she ate breakfast with it there, and Katerina at the front desk saw it and did not say anything, but for the first time gave her a small, genuine smile. 3 weeks passed. She worked at the framing shop. She slept at the pensione. She painted in the evenings on the floor of room 4. The paintings were bad, and then less bad. And then one night, in her 5th week, she finished a painting of Gino the cat, asleep on his stool, and she looked at it and she thought, that is a cat. That is the cat. And she cried for the first time since the bus, not because she was sad, but because it had been so long since she had made anything that she had forgotten what it felt like when she made something that was actually what she had meant to make. She cut her hair in the 6th week. She did it herself, with kitchen scissors, standing in front of the mirror in the bathroom down the hall. She cut 8 inches off. Her hair had been long for 15 years. When she was done, there was a stranger in the mirror, and the stranger had short, dark hair and a jaw she had forgotten she had. And she liked the stranger. She liked the stranger very much. And when she walked out of the bathroom, Katerina looked up from the desk and raised both eyebrows and said, "There you are."
"There I am." "Was the other one?" Isabella did not answer for a moment. Then she said, "Somebody's wife." Katerina nodded slowly. She went back to her ledger. She said without looking up, "Room is still 200 a week, Elena. You're all right." Elena. It was the first time anyone had called her that, and she had felt it settle on her like a piece of clothing that fit. "Thank you, Katerina." In Verano City, Marco's men had found nothing.
4 weeks of nothing. They had traced the 3 a.m. bus east. They had interviewed the waitress at the truck stop 7 times. They had sent 2 men to each of the 5 destination cities, and the men had come back with nothing, because a woman traveling under a fake passport who pays cash for a pensione room and works off the books at a framing shop and does not use a cell phone is a woman who does not exist in any of the databases the organization had access to. And there were 100 portoceras on the eastern coast, and the men could not check them all. Dante knew this. Dante also knew, although he would not admit it, not to Marco and not even to himself, that Marco was not trying as hard as Marco could have tried. There had been searches before, for informants, for debtors, for men who had crossed the family, and Marco had always found the target in a week. A month of nothing was not nothing. A month of nothing was a message. Dante did not ask Marco about it. Dante was instead doing something he had not done in years, which was sitting in the drawing room at night with the lights off and the fire going, and thinking. He was thinking about the Paris dress folded on the chair. He was thinking about the pearls on the vanity. He was thinking about a kitchen floor in the Corso district, 11 years ago, when a girl of 21 had sat cross-legged in her pajamas with her hair in a messy knot and a paintbrush in her hand and a smear of cobalt blue on her cheek. And she had looked up at him and she had laughed at something he had said, and that laugh had rung in the small apartment like a bell. And he had thought, I am going to marry this girl. He had married that girl. He did not know, sitting in the dark drawing room 5 weeks after her disappearance, where that girl had gone. He thought at first, the way most men think, that she had become Isabella Moretti, the silent woman in the pearls. But sitting in the dark, with the fire going, he understood slowly, and then faster, and then all at once, that the girl on the kitchen floor had been killed one day at a time for 6 years by him in his house, with his silence, and that Isabella Moretti was not the same person, had never been the same person, had been a costume the girl had worn while the girl died, and that the girl, the actual girl, had walked out of the house in the rain and had taken nothing of his with her. She had taken nothing of his, he thought, because nothing she had wanted had been his. He sat with this for a long time. He did not like it. He did not like, in particular, the way the understanding sat in his chest, the way the weight of it did not move no matter how much he drank, the way it did not shift when he closed his eyes, or when he opened them, or when he got up and walked to the window and looked out at the driveway where her footprints in the rain had been washed away weeks ago. At some point very late that night, he said out loud to the empty room, "Isabella." Nobody answered. He said it again. Nobody answered. He went upstairs. He did not sleep. He lay on his side of the bed with his eyes open, and he looked at her side, which Renata still made up every morning out of some habit nobody had told her to break. And he thought about her folding the Paris dress, and he thought about her counting the crystals, and he thought about her saying very quietly once a year ago, at a dinner he had barely remembered, "Dante, I am very tired," and him saying, without looking at her, "Then go to bed." He had not looked at her. He had not looked at her in a long time. He understood at 4 in the morning in an empty bed that this had been the problem. and that the problem had been his, and that the problem could not be solved by finding her, because finding her was not what the problem required. And for the first time in years, Dante Moretti did something he had not done since he was a boy, which was press the heel of his hand hard against his eyes and hold it there until the burning behind them stopped. By morning, he had decided two things. The first thing he had decided was that he would keep looking for her, because he could not help it, because it was not in him to stop. Because he was the man who had made a counterfeit passport for his own wife without telling her and kept it in a safe for 3 years. This was who he was. He did not know how to be somebody else. The second thing he had decided was that he would not bring her back. This was, he understood, the hardest decision he had ever made. Harder than the decision to take over his father's seat. Harder than the decision 8 years ago to put down a man named Salvi who had been his friend since grade school. Harder than any decision in a life that had been made almost entirely of decisions. He did not know if he could keep to it. He did not know if he was the kind of man who could keep a promise like that to himself about a woman he had already failed. But he had decided it. And for the first time in 5 weeks, in the gray light of morning coming through the bedroom window, Dante Moretti allowed himself to close his eyes and sleep for 40 minutes before Marco came to get him for the day's work. 400 miles away, in a pensione room in Porto Serra, Elena Ricci, who had been Isabella Moretti, who had been Isabella Rossi, who had been a girl on a kitchen floor with cobalt blue on her cheek, was awake and painting. She was painting a second cat. She was painting Gino again, from memory, because Gino was easy, and Gino was what she knew, and the painting of Gino that was leaning against the leg of the bed from the week before was a painting she thought was actually, honestly, not terrible. She was going to do better this time. The sun was coming up over Porto Serra. The gulls were arguing. Downstairs, Caterina was making coffee in a way that did not produce good coffee, but produced reliable coffee, which was almost as useful. In 5 hours, Elena would walk to the framing shop, where Tommaso would be in the back gluing mats, and the opera would be playing on the radio, and a woman might come in with a bad painting of her grandmother, and Elena would tell her it was beautiful, and it would be true. She painted for another hour. She made the whiskers too long. She fixed them. She made the eyes too yellow. She fixed them. The painting was not good yet, but the painting was going to be good. And she could feel that. She could feel it in her hands. She could feel it the way a person feels a storm coming. She was not thinking about Dante. She was not thinking about Verano City. She was thinking about the color of a cat's ear in a slant of morning light. And she was thinking about how hard it was to get that pink right, and she was thinking about whether she could afford a tube of alizarin crimson at the end of the week. And those 3 things were, for the moment, the whole content of her mind. And that was the greatest luxury she had ever been permitted in her life. The painting of Gino sold in the spring. It was not supposed to sell. Elena had brought it to the shop one morning in late March because Tommaso had complained for the 6th time that his front window looked like a funeral parlor, with nothing in it but empty frames and a hand-lettered sign advertising a sale that had ended in February. And she had thought, without really thinking about it, that a small painting of a cat might fill up the corner of the window and make the whole thing look a little less like a place where things went to die. She put a price tag on it of €80. 80 was what the canvas and the paint had cost her, plus 2. She had not expected anyone to buy it. She had expected it to sit in the window for a month and then come home with her, and she would hang it on the wall of room 4, next to the water stain shaped like a dog, and that would be the end of it. A woman bought it on the second day. The woman was in her 60s with gray hair cut short and a silk scarf that looked expensive. And she had been walking down the street, and she had stopped in front of the window, and she had stood there looking at the painting for almost a full minute before she came inside. And she had walked up to the counter and said, "The cat. In the window. How much?" €80, signora. Who painted it? Elena did not know what to say. One of our frame clients, Tommaso said from the back room without looking up. Local. Is there more of her work? Some. I'd like to see it. Elena's hands, which had been resting flat on the counter, went cold. I can have her bring some by, Tommaso said, still not looking up, still gluing a mat. End of the week. I'll come back Friday. Friday. The woman paid cash for the cat. She took it under her arm, wrapped in brown paper, and she walked out of the shop, and Elena watched her go through the glass of the door and thought, very calmly, I have to leave this city. Tommaso came out from the back room. He was wiping glue off his fingers with a rag. He looked at Elena over the top of his reading glasses, and his face was the face of a man who had been alive for a long time and had seen a lot of women stand very still behind counters, and he said, without any particular inflection, "Elena, sit down." "I'm fine." "Sit down." She sat down on the stool behind the register. Gino the cat, the real Gino, blinked at her from his spot by the radio. "That woman," Tommaso said, "is Signora Della Rosa." "I don't know who that is." "No, you wouldn't. She runs a gallery 2 streets up from the cathedral. Small gallery. Good gallery. She doesn't buy cats from framing shops, Elena. She bought this one because she wanted to know who painted it. I can't." "You can't what?" I can't sell her anything." Tommaso looked at her for a long moment. He took off his reading glasses. He folded them. He put them on the counter. He sat down on the other stool. "Elena." "Please, Tommaso." "How old are you?" 31. "You've been here 4 months." "Yes." "You paid your rent to Caterina in cash every week for 4 months. You work for me for cash. You don't have a phone. You don't have a bank account. You don't talk about where you're from. You flinch every time the bell over the door rings too loud." She did not answer. "I'm not asking you to tell me anything, Elena. I'm telling you that I am not stupid, and Caterina is not stupid, and the woman who just walked out of my shop with your painting is not stupid either, and in about a week she is going to start asking questions, and the questions are going to get more specific, and I need to know before Friday whether you are running from a man, or from the police, or from both." Elena looked at her hands. "A man," she said very quietly. "All right, not the police. All right. He is a dangerous man, Tommaso." "Dangerous how?" "Dangerous in the way that you don't want to know about." Tommaso nodded slowly. He put his reading glasses back on. He stood up. "Then on Friday," he said, "when Signora Della Rosa comes back, I am going to tell her that the artist is a shy woman who does not want to meet buyers, and who signs her work with a single name, and who would like to sell through the gallery under those conditions only. And Signora Della Rosa is going to say yes, because Signora Della Rosa has bought from shy artists before, and because she already knows you are worth something, or she would not have come in." "Tommaso." "Elena, you can say no. I am not making the decision for you. I am telling you what your options are." Elena sat on the stool and looked at Gino, who was cleaning his paw with the particular concentration of a cat who did not care at all about any of the decisions being made in his general vicinity, and she thought about room 4, and about the 4,200 euros that was now down to 900, and about the tube of alizarin crimson she had still not bought, and about the second painting of Gino, and the third, which was of a window, and the fourth, which was of Caterina's hands on the ledger, which Caterina did not know she had painted. She thought about Dante. She thought about the passport. She thought about whether, if she sold a painting in a gallery 2 streets from the cathedral in Porto Serra, and it was signed Elena, and Signora Della Rosa mentioned it to a friend, and the friend mentioned it to a cousin, and the cousin had a husband who knew a man who drove trucks between Verano and the coast, whether any of that was a line that could be traced. She thought, probably, yes, eventually. Then she thought that she had been in Porto Serra for 4 months, and the money was running out, and she could not stay in the framing shop forever. And if she was going to paint for a living, she was going to have to sell paintings. And if she was going to sell paintings, she was going to have to stand in front of a person someday and let them see her work. And there was no version of her life where that did not eventually happen. Unless she wanted to spend the rest of her life painting cats for room 4 in a pensione. And she did not want that. She wanted to paint. She wanted to paint badly. She realized, more badly than she wanted to be safe, and that was a thing she had not known about herself 4 months ago. "One name," she said. "One name. Elena. Just Elena. No last name. I'll tell her. And, Tommaso, if anyone ever comes to this shop asking about me, any man at all, I will tell them I have never met you. Thank you. Elena. Yes. I had a wife once, a long time ago. She was not a woman who could stay. She left with a truck driver from Bologna when I was 39. I spent 11 years being angry about it. He was not looking at her. He was looking at a spot on the counter where the varnish had worn off. She was right to go. I was not a good husband to her. I did not hit her. I was not cruel to her, but I did not see her. I stopped seeing her in about our 3rd year, and I did not see her again until the morning she was gone. I'm telling you this because I want you to know that I know what you look like. That's all. I am not asking anything. I am telling you that I know. Elena did not answer for a long moment. Then she said, "Thank you, Tommaso." Bring me 6 canvases by Friday. Bigger than the cat. She'll want bigger. I don't have bigger. Then paint bigger. I can't afford. Tommaso walked to the register. He opened it. He took out 200 euros in 20s. He put them in an envelope. He put the envelope in her hand. "Advance," he said. "Against commission. Don't argue with me about it. Go to the art store. Buy what you need. Paint 6 things. Bring them here Friday morning before she comes at 2. Tommaso, don't argue with me about it, Elena. She did not argue with him about it. She painted for 3 days. She painted in room 4, on the floor, sitting cross-legged the way she had sat on a kitchen floor in the Corso district 11 years ago. And she painted with the window open because the air was warmer now, and the paint dried faster, and she could feel, in her hands, the thing she had been missing for 6 years, which was the certainty that came when a brush went down exactly where the brush needed to go. She painted a window with a curtain. She painted Katerina's hands on the ledger, the hands she had been working on for a month, the knuckles slightly swollen, the nails very short, the pen held between the first and second fingers the way her own grandmother had held a pen. She painted a pair of shoes by a door. They were her own shoes, the cheap black flats she had bought in the second week, and they were not beautiful shoes, but she painted them the way they actually looked, scuffed at the toes, a little bit tired, waiting by the door of room 4 to go out into the city again. She painted a bowl of lemons on Katerina's desk, which Katerina did not know she had noticed, which Katerina kept there because Katerina had grown up in a village in the south where lemons meant something, and Elena painted them the way Katerina looked at them, which was with a kind of quiet, unshowy love. She painted the view from the window of room 4 at 5 in the afternoon, when the light went gold and the chimneys on the roof across the street threw long shadows on the tiles. And she painted, last, a portrait of a woman she did not identify, a woman with short dark hair and a jaw and eyes the color of river stones, sitting on the edge of a narrow bed with her hands in her lap, looking not at the viewer and not away from the viewer, but at something slightly to the left of the viewer, as though she were considering something she had not yet decided. She did not tell Tommaso what it was. She did not need to. On Friday morning, when she brought the 6 canvases to the shop wrapped in newsprint, Tommaso unwrapped them one by one on the counter, and he looked at each of them for a long time without saying anything. And when he got to the self-portrait, he stopped. He stood looking at it. He adjusted his reading glasses. He looked at it some more. "This one is not for sale," he said. "No." "Good. I'll take it home." "No. Leave it. She'll want to see it. She should see it. But the price is 10,000 euros and you will not lower it. Do you understand?" "Tommaso, 10,000. Do you understand?" "Yes." "Good. Go make coffee. She'll be here in 3 hours and you're not allowed to meet her." Signora Della Rosa came at 2:03. Elena was in the back room pretending to sort old frames. She could hear their voices through the thin wall. She could hear Signora Della Rosa say, very quietly, Oh, Tommaso." She could hear Tommaso say, "I told you." She could hear a long silence, which she understood to be Signora Della Rosa standing in front of the self-portrait, and she could hear the small, soft sound of Signora Della Rosa clearing her throat. "I want all of them. 5 of them. The 6th is not for sale. That one especially? That one especially is not for sale." She was firm. "How much?" 3,000 each for the others. 12,000 for the self-portrait, if she ever decides to sell it, which she will not this year. I'll give you the 5 for 13 total. You take them for the gallery. 50-50 on the sales. Cash to me. I handle her. 13 for 5 is cheap, Tommaso. I know it's cheap. It's the first time. I want her in your gallery. After the first show, we renegotiate. The first show when? June. June is 6 weeks. 6 weeks. There was another silence. Tommaso. Who is she? A frame client. Tommaso. Margherita. She is a frame client. That is what she is. That is what she is going to be. Another silence, longer this time. All right, Signora della Rosa said. All right. A frame client. I understand you. Good. Does she have a last name? No? No? Elena. That's it. That's what she signs. That is very dramatic, Tommaso. Take it or leave it, Margarita. I'll take it. Elena in the back room pressed her palms flat against the workbench and tried to breathe, and she found that she could. The show opened in June. It was a small show, 8 paintings total, the 5 Signora della Rosa had bought, plus 3 more Elena finished in the weeks between, not including the self-portrait, which she had taken home and which now lived on the wall of room 4, and which she did not let herself look at except in the mornings, first thing, because looking at it any other time of day made her feel strange in a way she could not name. Caterina came to the opening. Caterina wore a dress Elena had never seen before, a dark green dress with 3/4 sleeves, and her hair was down, and she looked like a different person, not younger exactly, but more like the woman she had been before she had started running a pensione and keeping track of other people's rent. Caterina stood in the corner of the gallery with a glass of cheap white wine, and she looked at the painting of her own hands on the ledger for a long time, and then she came over to Elena, and she did not say anything. She just put her hand, very briefly, on Elena's elbow, and then she walked away and got another glass of wine. Tommaso came. He wore a blue suit that was too big for him in the shoulders, and he ate 3 of the small cheese things from the tray, and he told anybody who would listen that he had discovered Elena, which was not true, but which Elena did not correct because Tommaso was having a wonderful time. 5 of the 8 paintings sold on opening night. By the end of the second week, all 8 had sold. By the middle of July, Signora della Rosa had placed Elena in a group show in a city 200 miles north, a city Elena had never been to and did not need to travel to in person because Signora della Rosa handled all of the logistics and Tommaso handled all of the shipping, and Elena's name, which was just Elena, started to appear in very small type at the bottom of gallery listings in 3 regional art magazines. The money came slowly at first, and then less slowly. By September, she had moved out of room 4. She did not move far. She moved to a small apartment 3 streets over, 1 floor up, with a kitchen and a bathroom of her own and a south-facing window where she could set up an easel and not have to paint on the floor anymore. Caterina was not sad to see her go. Caterina shook her hand when she handed back the key and said, "You are going to do fine, Elena Ricci." And Elena walked out of the pensione for the last time carrying 2 paper bags of clothes and 1 small canvas, which was the painting of Caterina's lemons, which she had taken off Caterina's desk and reframed and given back to her as a gift, and which Caterina had refused 3 times and accepted on the 4th with a face that did not cry but came close. In Verano City, the summer had been bad for Dante Moretti. It had been bad in small ways first. An old contact at the port had stopped returning his calls in May. A shipment he had expected on a Thursday had come on a Saturday and had been 1 container short. A judge he had owned for 9 years had accepted the envelope in June, but had, in July, ruled against one of Dante's men in a way the envelope had been intended to prevent. Each of these things, on its own, was a minor thing. Each of these things, on its own, could be explained. Together, they were not a minor thing, and together, they were a pattern, and Dante, who was many things but was not a stupid man, could see the pattern. The pattern was that he was losing the thread. Carraro had noticed. Carraro had not said anything because Carraro was an old ally, and Carraro did not say things out loud that Carraro did not want to be repeated, but Carraro had started being slightly less available for dinner, and Carraro's capos had started slightly not quite showing up on time, and these were the kinds of signals that, in Dante's world, came before the bigger signals, which came before the worse signals, which was the signal that Carraro was going to replace him. Dante was not yet at that signal, but he could see it from where he was standing. Marco came to him in August in the drawing room. "Dante, Marco, Carraro is having dinner next Tuesday with Valenti." Dante did not say anything. "Valenti is in the city for 2 days. He is staying at the Grand. He has asked Carraro to dinner. Carraro has said yes." "Where are they eating?" "Castello's." Castello's was a restaurant in the financial district that had been owned by the Moretti family for 22 years. Castello's was where Dante took men he wanted to intimidate.
Valenti was a man from the north. Valenti was a man Dante had not done business with in 11 years. Valenti having dinner with Carraro at Castello's, which was Dante's restaurant, was not a meeting Dante had been invited to, and it was a meeting that was being held with some deliberateness in a room Dante owned. "They are telling me something," Dante said. "Yes." "What are they telling me?" "That they are not afraid of you, Dante. That is what they are telling you." "Is Carraro going to move against me?" "Not yet." "When?" "I don't know, not this year. Probably not next year. But he is putting things in place, and he wants you to see him putting them in place because he wants you to understand that he has a problem with you and that he expects you to fix the problem before he has to fix it for you." "The problem being?" Marco did not answer. "The problem being, Marco." Marco sat down in the chair across from him. Marco looked older, Dante realized. Marco had always looked old for as long as Dante had known him, but he looked older now, and the particular old Marco looked was the old of a man who had not been sleeping well for some months. "The problem," Marco said, "is that everybody in this city knows that your wife left you in the middle of the night in the rain, Dante. The problem is that they have known for 4 months. The problem is that we have not found her, and they know we have not found her, because our men have talked, because our men always talk, and the men who talked have talked to men who talked to Carraro. And the story that is going around, Dante, is that the most feared man in Verano City cannot find a woman who weighs 120 pounds and does not know how to use a gun. And Carraro is looking at that story, and Valenti is looking at that story, and Valenti is coming to dinner at your restaurant to tell you, without saying it, that he is looking at that story." Indeed. Dante closed his eyes. "Call off the search," Marco said. "What?" "Call it off, Dante. It is hurting you. It is hurting you worse than she ever hurt you. It has been 4 months. Call the men in. Tell them to stop. Let the story end." "If I stop looking for her, it means she won." "Dante, she already won 4 months ago. She won the moment she walked out the door. The only question now is whether you are going to stand in front of the city and keep losing, or whether you are going to put the thing down and go back to running your family. Those are the 2 choices." Dante stood up. He walked to the window. He looked down at the driveway, the way he had looked at the driveway 100 nights since she had left, and he understood, looking down at it now, that Marco was right. "Call them in," he said. "Dante, call them in, Marco. All of them, today." "Yes." "And Marco." "Yes, Dante. I want a dinner at Castello's. Wednesday. For Valenti. Just Valenti. I want him at my table, in my restaurant, and I want it to look like his idea." "He won't come." "He will come. Tell him there is a deal from the north I have not been able to place, because I have not had the right partner. Tell him I think he is the right partner. Tell him I am very tired of having to go through Trieste, and I would consider alternatives. Put it in those words. He will come." "You don't have a deal from the north, Dante." "I will have one by Wednesday." Marco looked at him. "What?" Dante said. "Nothing." "What, Marco? You haven't spoken to me like that in 5 months. That was you. That was the old you." "Yes." "Good." Marco walked out. Dante stood at the window for another minute. Then he turned, and he walked to the desk in the corner of the drawing room, and he opened the top drawer, and he took out a small photograph he had not looked at in 4 months. The photograph was of Isabella, at 21, on the kitchen floor of the apartment in the Corso district, cross-legged in her pajamas with her hair in a messy knot and a paintbrush in her hand and a smear of cobalt blue on her cheek. He looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he put it back in the drawer. He closed the drawer. He did not look at it again for a long time. The story of his wife did not die, not entirely. Stories like that did not die in Verano City. They only moved underground. They only became the kind of thing men said to each other in steam rooms and in the back seats of cars, and Dante understood that. But the story of the search ended. The men came in. The men stopped asking questions at truck stops and bus stations and pensione desks in towns along the coast. The story settled over the course of the autumn into the kind of quiet thing that sat behind Dante's back at dinners and in meetings, a thing everybody knew about but nobody said out loud, a thing that did not, on its own, collapse his empire because his empire was old and deep and had survived worse. He made the deal with Valenti. It was a good deal.
Valenti came to Castello's on the Wednesday, exactly as Dante had said he would, and they ate veal and drank a wine from the hills outside Turin, and by midnight they had an arrangement that would save Dante 3% on a shipping line he had been overpaying on for 6 years, and Valenti had left the restaurant with his arm around Dante's shoulders. And Carraro, who had heard about the dinner within 20 minutes of its ending, understood that he had mistimed his hand, and Carraro went back to taking Dante's calls on the first ring. By October, the thing in Dante's empire that had been bleeding was no longer bleeding. By November, it was almost, but not quite, healed. By December, Dante Moretti was back in his chair, and the city feared him again, and his men worked, and his wife had been gone for 14 months, and the photograph in the drawer had not been looked at once since the night he had put it back there. He was not happy. He was not unhappy either. He was the thing that had always been underneath the other things, which was the head of a family, alone in a house he had built for a wife who had walked out of it in the rain. And he went to work in the morning, and he came home at night, and he did not bring women into the drawing room anymore. Not because he had become a better man, but because he had learned, finally, what women in the drawing room had cost him. And he was not going to pay that price again. In Porto Serra, Elena had her first solo show in November. It was held in a gallery in the city 200 miles north. The city Signor della Rosa had placed her in that summer, and the gallery was larger than anything Elena had imagined she would be shown in. And the show was, by the modest standards of the regional art scene, a small event of some significance. A critic from one of the magazines came. A collector from the capital came. A woman in her 40s with severe black hair and a very quiet voice. And the collector bought 2 paintings, and then on her way out, she turned in the doorway, and she said to Signora della Rosa, "Who is she?" "Her name is Elena." "I know her name is Elena. Who is she?" "A frame client from Porto Serra." "Margherita." "A frame client, Beatrice, from Porto Serra. That is what she is." Beatrice, the collector, looked at Signora della Rosa for a long moment, and then she smiled, very slightly, and she said, "All right, a frame client. Tell her I would like to commission a piece. Call me next week." "I will call you next week." Beatrice left. Signora della Rosa walked across the gallery to where Elena was standing, and she took Elena by the elbow, and she said, very quietly, in the particular tone of voice she used when she was giving an instruction, "My dear, you are going to be a problem for me in about 2 years." "A problem how?" "A problem in the sense that you are going to outgrow me. Not this year, but soon. I want you to know that I see it coming, and I am not going to be upset about it when it comes, because I am 71 years old, and I do not need to be upset about anything anymore. But I want you to know, Elena, while you are still small enough that I can hold your hand, that you are not going to be small for very long. Do you understand me?" "I understand you." "Good. Drink your wine. Smile at people. Do not tell them anything." "I never do." Signora della Rosa walked away. Elena stood in the gallery in a dark red dress she had bought for 60 euros at a shop on the waterfront, and she held her glass of wine, and she looked across the room at her own paintings on the walls, and she felt, for the first time in a very long time, the particular and specific thing that she had forgotten the shape of, which was the feeling of having made something that belonged to her, and that she had signed with a name that was hers, and that strangers were paying money for because the thing she had made had moved something in them. She did not think about Dante that night. She thought about him the next morning, for about a minute, in the kitchen of her apartment in Porto Serra, with a cup of coffee in her hand and the gray dawn light coming through the south-facing window, and what she thought was this, that she had, somewhere in the last 6 months, stopped being afraid of him in the specific breath-stopping way she had been afraid of him for the first 4 months, and that she had started being afraid of him in a different way, which was the way a person is afraid of weather, of something large and indifferent that existed somewhere else and that might or might not come for her someday. This was a better kind of fear. This was a kind of fear she could paint through. She finished her coffee. She went to the easel. The canvas on the easel was a large one, almost as tall as she was, and she had been working on it for 3 weeks, and it was a painting of a woman's back, a woman walking away from the viewer down a long corridor, and the woman was not anyone Elena knew, but the woman was, if Elena was being honest with herself, a woman who looked a great deal like the woman Elena saw in the mirror every morning. And the corridor was, if she was being honest with herself, the corridor of the Moretti estate, which she had not seen in 14 months, which she could still describe down to the pattern in the wallpaper. She picked up a brush. She put it in her mouth while she mixed a color on the palette with her other hand. She took the brush out of her mouth. She painted. The painting of the woman walking down the corridor sold in the capital for 41,000 euros a year and 2 months later, and it was not Signora della Rosa who sold it. Elena had outgrown the small gallery in Porto Serra exactly the way Signora della Rosa had said she would, and she had outgrown it with the particular grace of a person who had been warned and had listened. She had flown to the capital for the first time in the spring of her 3rd year. Flown, not taken a bus, which was a thing she had to think about for 2 weeks before she could make herself buy the ticket, because airports had cameras and airports had lists. And airports were the kind of place where a name could be checked against another name and the wrong answer could come back. And she had flown under the name Elena Ricci, which was now a name attached to a bank account and a tax number and a small but increasingly respectable body of work. And nobody at the airport had looked at her twice. In the capital, she had signed with a dealer named Rafael Kostas, a Greek man of 60 with a shaved head and very good suits, who ran a gallery in a converted carriage house 2 streets from the presidential palace, and who did not care who Elena had been before she had walked into his gallery with a portfolio because he was interested in who she was going to be in 5 years, which was the only question he cared about with any artist he took on. Rafael Kostas had looked at her portfolio for 20 minutes without saying anything, and then he had looked up at her over the rim of his reading glasses, and he had said, "Signora Ricci, I'm going to make you a great deal of money. Please try not to embarrass either of us while I do it." "I will try." "Good. Sign this." She had signed it. The corridor painting had been the second piece Raphael sold under the new contract. It had gone to an industrialist from the north who kept his collection in a private house outside the capital. And Raphael had told Elena the sale price in a phone call that lasted 40 seconds. And Elena had been in the kitchen of her apartment in Porto Serra when the call came, and she had stood holding the phone for almost a minute after Raphael had hung up. And then she had sat down on the floor with her back against the cabinets, and she had laughed, in a way she had not laughed in years, the kind of laugh that hurt the ribs, because 41,000 euros for a painting of a woman's back in a corridor was the kind of number she did not know how to feel. She was 34 now. Her hair was still short. Her apartment in Porto Serra was still the small one with the south-facing window, although she had added a second room off the back for storage, and Tommaso had helped her build the shelves. She still walked to the framing shop twice a week, not because she needed to, but because Tommaso was 71, and his hands were not what they had been. And she liked the smell of the wood glue. And Gino the cat had gotten old and slept almost all day now on the stool by the radio. Caterina came over on Sundays for dinner, and Caterina had opinions about everything Elena cooked. And Caterina was the closest thing Elena had to family in Porto Serra, and Elena had bought her an apartment in the building next door the year before, because Caterina's knees had been bothering her on the stairs at the pensione, and Caterina had argued about it for 6 days before accepting, and Caterina still mentioned it at dinner every 3rd Sunday in a voice that was meant to sound annoyed and did not quite get there. Elena did not have a romantic life. She had not tried. There had been 2 men in 3 years who had made an effort, a painter in the capital, a businessman at a gallery opening in Lyon, and she had been polite to both of them and had not returned their calls, because she understood about herself that she was not ready, and perhaps would never be ready, for the specific act of letting another man into a room where she was alone, and this was a thing she had decided to be honest about with herself, even when being honest about it felt like admitting a defeat. Raphael noticed because Raphael noticed everything. "Elena," he said to her in his office one afternoon in late April, in her 4th year, over coffee that he made himself in a small machine on his desk, "I'm going to ask you a question, and you are going to tell me to mind my own business, and then we are going to have the conversation anyway." "All right." "Who are you hiding from?" She did not answer. "You do not have to tell me his name. I do not need to know his name. But I am planning the calendar for next autumn, and there is an event I want to put you in, and I need to know how careful we need to be." "What event?" "The Belligori Foundation Gala." Elena set her coffee down. "Raphael." "I know." "Raphael, the Belligori Gala is—" "I know what the Belligori Gala is, Elena. I have been going to the Belligori Gala for 19 years. That is why I am bringing it up. The Belligori Foundation Gala was the kind of event Elena had read about in the glossy back pages of gallery magazines for 2 years and had never, not once, let herself imagine being invited to. It was held once a year in a private estate outside the capital, and it benefited a charitable trust that was funded half by old money and half by money whose origin nobody was supposed to ask about. And the event's attendees were, each year, a curated mix of legitimate collectors, corporate heirs, political figures, foreign diplomats, and men in very good suits who owned restaurants and shipping lines, and who were widely understood to own other things as well, and whose presence at the gala was the price the foundation paid for the checks those men wrote to keep a pediatric hospital running outside the capital. It was also, Elena understood without Raphael needing to say it, exactly the kind of event where a man like Dante Moretti might appear. Not every year. Perhaps not most years. But the kind of event where his name would not be strange on a guest list, and where, if he happened to be in the capital on that particular weekend, he would likely attend because his world and the gala's world touched at the edges, and had touched for as long as the gala had existed. "No," Elena said. "Elena."
"No, Raphael. Listen to me." "I have listened." "No." Raphael leaned back in his chair. He put his coffee down. He folded his hands in his lap. He was wearing a blue suit that fit him perfectly and a watch that was not ostentatious but had cost more than most cars. And when he folded his hands like that, it was the thing he did when he was about to say something he had been thinking about for some time. "They want the corridor painting as the centerpiece." "What?"
"The corridor painting, the one that went to Pirovini last year. He is loaning it back for the evening. They want to hang it at the top of the main staircase. They are calling their theme The Long Walk, and they are building the entire program around your painting. The Belligori Foundation. The main program, Elena. Not a sidewall, not a group show, yours. One painting. At the top of the staircase, all evening. They're going to announce an acquisition fund in your name before the speeches end.
100,000 euros a year for 3 years, for young female painters from the southern provinces. In your name. Lena.
Elena did not answer for a long time. "I have been sitting on this for 6 days, Raphael said. "I have told nobody. I have not told my assistant. I have not told my wife. I am telling you now because I have to respond to them by Friday, and I could not in good faith respond to them without putting the question to you first, because I have understood for 2 years now that there is somebody you do not want to see, and I have worked very carefully around that shape without knowing what was inside it, and I am asking you now, as your dealer, not as your friend, whether this is a room you can walk into." Elena stood up. She walked to the window of Raphael's office, which looked out on a small interior courtyard with a fig tree in it. "Is he going to be there?" she said. "I do not know who he is." "A yes or no question, Raphael. Are there any of the men from that world, the criminal world, who are likely to be there? There will be 7 or 8 men at that gala who are adjacent to that world. There always are. The foundation accepts their money and seats them at good tables and does not ask them what they do for a living. That is what the foundation is. If you go, you will be in a room with those men. I cannot promise you otherwise. The question is whether any of them in particular is the one you do not want to see." Elena stood at the window. She watched a small bird land on a branch of the fig tree and then fly away. She thought about the corridor painting. She thought about painting it 3 years ago in a kitchen in Porto Serra with the south-facing window open, standing in her bare feet and a smock that had paint on it from other paintings. And she thought about the woman in it, the woman walking away, the woman whose back was the only part of her the viewer could see. And she thought about the things she had understood about that woman while she had been painting her, which was that the woman was walking away from something and also walking toward something, and that the two things were the same distance apart. And that was the whole meaning of the painting, which was a meaning Elena had not been able to articulate at the time, but which she had been able to paint. She thought about the 100,000 euros a year for 3 years for young female painters from the southern provinces. She thought about a girl. She could see the girl very clearly, the girl she invented in that moment, standing at the window. A girl of 20 in a coastal town, with a mother who did not understand her and a father who drank. And the girl had a canvas and 3 tubes of paint and no money to buy more. And the girl was going to either stop painting this year or she was going to be funded by the Belligori Foundation, by the acquisition fund named Elena, to keep going. She turned around. Put me in. Raphael nodded once. Raphael. Yes. I need things. I need conditions. Tell me. No photographers, no press, no photographs of me, ever. Not at the gala, not in the catalog, not in the listings. I have never been photographed for the press, and I'm not starting now. If they want a photograph, they can photograph the painting. Done. I will not give interviews. I will not answer questions about my background. Done. I will wear what I want. Done. And I need a security arrangement. Raphael's face did not change. What kind? I need 2 men. Private. Not hired through the foundation. Through somebody you know personally. Men who work for you, or who have worked for you, and who will be near me all night, and who will know what to do if a specific person approaches me. I will give you a name. I will give you a photograph. If that person approaches me at any point during the evening, I want to know before he is within 30 feet, and I want to be able to walk out of that building in under 3 minutes if I ask to. Raphael was very still. Elena, can you do it? Yes. Can you do it without anybody at the foundation knowing? Yes. Can you do it without anybody at your gallery knowing? Yes. Elena, who is he? His name, Elena said, is Dante Moretti. Raphael closed his eyes. Ah. Do you know him? I have met him, twice at other events, many years ago. Then you understand. I understand. There was a long silence. Elena? Yes. I'm going to ask you something, and please do not mistake the question for criticism. Why are you going? You do not need to go. I can tell the foundation no. I can tell them to hang the painting and announce the fund without you. Your career does not need this evening. Your career is fine. Why are you going? Elena looked at him for a long moment. Because, she said, if I say no to this, I will have said no to it because of him. And I have spent 3 years not saying no to things because of him. And I am not going to start. That is the first reason. And the second reason, she said slowly, is that I would like very much to see what he looks like when he realizes I am not dead. Raphael nodded once. All right, he said. Autumn, the gala. I will handle the security. I will handle the press. You will handle the painting and the dress and the walk up the staircase. Agreed. Agreed. She flew back to Porto Serra that night. She did not tell Caterina about the gala. She did not tell Tommaso. She did not tell anybody. She painted for 6 weeks without telling anybody anything, and she finished 3 paintings in that time that were, she thought, the best paintings she had ever made. And then she stopped painting in the middle of July because she realized she was painting to keep from thinking, and that was not a good reason to paint, and she would rather think than paint badly. She thought, for most of August, about what she was going to wear. She did not decide until very late. 400 miles away, in Verano City, the summer of Dante Moretti's 4th year alone passed the way the 3 summers before it had passed, which was quietly and efficiently and without any of the things his life had once had in it. He had been, he understood now, a different kind of man for the last 3 years. Not a better man. He was not interested in the vocabulary of better, which belonged to people who had not done the things he had done. But a different man, certainly. He had not brought a woman into the house in 3 years. He had not gone to the restaurants he used to go to. He had eaten dinner at home, alone, at the long table in the dining room, 4 or 5 nights a week, with Renata serving him the way Renata had always served him, except that now there was only the one plate at the one end of the long table, and nobody sitting at the other end. And Renata did not seem to mind the arrangement, or if she did not say so, and Dante did not ask. He had, in the 4th year, stopped expecting to hear from Isabella. This was a thing he had not expected to do. In the 1st year, he had expected it every day. Expected a letter, expected a phone call, expected a lawyer, expected something. In the 2nd year, he had expected it every week. By the 3rd year, he had expected it once a month, on the 17th, because the 17th was the date of their anniversary. And he had sat in the drawing room every 17th of the month for 12 months, waiting for a phone that did not ring. By the 4th year, he had understood that the phone was not going to ring, that the letter was not going to come, that she was not going to contact him, not because she was afraid of him, which he had assumed for 3 years, but because she did not want to, which was a different thing entirely and a harder thing to sit with. Marco had retired in the third year. Marco had gone to live in a small house in the hills outside the city with a second wife Marco had married in secret 18 months before retiring, a widow named Paola who Dante had met exactly twice and who had looked Dante in the eye both times in a way that made Dante understand that Paola had a very low opinion of him and did not consider that opinion to be his business. Dante had attended the wedding. He had sent flowers. He had not been invited to the house in the hills after the wedding, and he had not tried to visit because he understood that Marco had made a decision at 70 years old to spend the years he had left not in rooms that smelled like cigar smoke and old money, but in a garden, with a woman who made him laugh, and Dante did not have the right to intrude on that decision. He missed Marco. He had not known, for most of the 38 years he had known Marco, how much of his own equilibrium had been held together by Marco's presence in a room, and he had discovered, after Marco's retirement, that the absence was specific and that nothing and nobody had filled it. The capos he had now were younger men, efficient men, men who did their jobs and went home to their wives and did not ask Dante about his life. He trusted them because he had to, and he did not trust them because they were not Marco. In August of his fourth year alone, an envelope arrived from the Belligori Foundation. It was delivered by hand by a young man in a dark suit to Dante's office in the financial district, and it was addressed to him personally in the old-fashioned calligraphy the foundation used on all its correspondence, and it contained an invitation to the autumn gala. Dante did not usually attend the gala. He had attended twice, many years before, once with his father, once without, both before he had married Isabella. And he had not been back because the gala was not the kind of event that served his business, and because the kind of socializing it required was the kind he had always found tedious. Dante preferred restaurants. Dante preferred dinners where the men he was meeting had something they needed from him, and he had something he needed from them, and where the arrangement was agreed upon by the time the second course was cleared. The gala was not a restaurant. The gala was a performance. But the invitation was the second in 2 years. He had thrown out the one last year. The 2 in a row, he understood, was a signal. The foundation did not send invitations twice in a row to men who did not attend the first time unless the foundation had a reason. He did not know the reason. He did not particularly care to know the reason. But the reason existed, and the reason was sitting in front of him on his desk, and in the world Dante lived in. Signals of that kind were not ignored without consequences. He set the invitation down. He thought about it for 2 days. On the third day, he called his secretary, and he told her to RSVP yes, and to have his tailor book an appointment, and to arrange for a car, and to clear his calendar for the Friday and the Saturday of that weekend in October. And the secretary, who was a very competent woman of 53, who had worked for the Morettis for 21 years and who did not ask questions, said yes and hung up. The gala was on a Saturday in mid-October. Elena flew to the capital on the Thursday. Raphael met her at the airport himself, which was not something he usually did, and drove her to an apartment he kept for out-of-town artists, which was a 2-bedroom on the 4th floor of a quiet building on a quiet street where nobody knew anybody, and where she could stay for 3 nights and see no one. Raphael came by on this Friday afternoon with 2 men in their 30s. Both men were ex-military. Both men had worked for Raphael before, on other projects, for other reasons he did not specify, and she did not ask. Their names were Luca and Andrei, and Luca was the taller one with the quiet eyes, and Andrei was the shorter one who did not smile, and they sat at Raphael's kitchen table for an hour, and they looked at the photograph of Dante Moretti that Raphael had obtained from a back issue of a business magazine. And they asked Elena 3 questions, and then they stopped asking questions, and she understood, at the end of the hour, that Luca and Andrei were the correct 2 men for the job, and that Raphael had chosen correctly, and that she was, as much as a person in her position could be, protected. "You will wear this," Raphael said, setting a small velvet pouch on the table. "Inside the dress, against the skin. It is a tracker. It transmits to Luca's phone and Andrei's phone. If we lose sight of you at any point during the evening, we will not lose you on the tracker. All right? You will not drink anything you have not seen poured. I don't drink at events. Good. I was going to order sparkling water. Sparkling water is fine. See it poured. I will. You will not go anywhere in the building that is not on the 1st or 2nd floor without one of us within 10 feet of you. No bathrooms on the 3rd floor. no offices, no private rooms. If anyone invites you to any such room, you will smile, you will decline, you will find me. Understood. If he speaks to you, Elena, I know. I want you to know before the evening begins that if you decide at any point, for any reason, that you want to leave, you raise your hand and touch your earring, and we are out of the building in 90 seconds. You do not need to say anything to anyone. You do not need to explain. You touch the earring, and we go. And if he approaches you, and you decide you want to have the conversation, which I am recommending as your dealer, that you do not have, we will be within 15 feet at all times, and the conversation will end the moment you touch the earring.
Raphael. Yes. Thank you. That night, alone in the apartment, Elena stood in front of the mirror in the bedroom and tried on the dress for the third time.
The dress was black. It was not the black of the Paris dress she had left folded on a chair in a house 4 years ago. It was a different black, a deeper black, a black that ate light, a black that had been made specifically for her by a woman in Milan who ran a small studio above a bakery and who had taken Elena's measurements without asking her name. The dress had a high neck. The dress had long sleeves. The dress was floor-length, and it fit her the way clothing fits a woman who has paid for it herself with money she has earned. And when Elena looked at herself in the mirror in the dress, what she saw was not Isabella Moretti, and what she saw was not Isabella Rossi either, and what she saw was not even quite Elena Ricci, but a fourth woman, a woman she did not quite have a name for yet, who had walked out of something 4 years ago in the rain and had been walking, one way and another, toward this mirror ever since. She did not wear pearls. She did not wear any of the jewelry she had left behind in Verano City, because all of that had been Dante's, and she was not going to wear Dante's jewelry to a gala where Dante might be present. She wore small gold earrings she had bought herself in Porto Serra 2 years before at a market, the kind of earrings a schoolteacher might wear, and one of them, the left one, had the tracker in it because Raphael had had the tracker built into it that morning, and she touched it once with her finger to make sure it was seated correctly. She did not sleep much that night. She lay in the unfamiliar bed in Raphael's apartment, and she listened to the traffic in the street below, and she thought, for the first time in 3 years, about the driveway at the Moretti estate in the rain, and about the man snoring softly in the bed upstairs, and about the small sound the pearls had made on the vanity when she had set them down. And she thought about all of it without any fear, without any grief, without any of the things that had sat in her chest for the first 18 months. And what she found, lying in the dark, was that when she examined those memories now, they felt to her the way a photograph feels in a drawer. A thing that had happened, a thing that was real, but a thing that was no longer happening to her, and which could not make her cry or make her shake or make her sit down on a floor, because it had finally taken its hands off her. She slept a little toward morning. She dreamed of nothing. She woke up on the Saturday, and she made herself coffee, and she sat by the window for a long time in her pajamas. And at 4 in the afternoon, Raphael's assistant came by with a hair and makeup team and stayed for 2 hours. And at 7 in the evening, Luca and Andre arrived in a black car. And at 7:15, Elena Ricci walked down 4 flights of stairs in a black dress that was the kind of black a woman wears only once in her life. And she got into the back seat of the car, and Luca closed the door behind her, and Andre started the engine, and the car pulled away from the curb into the evening traffic of the capital. And somewhere in another car, in another part of the city, Dante Moretti was putting on a watch his father had given him, and checking the set of his tie in the mirror of a hotel suite he had booked for one night, and thinking about nothing in particular, because he did not know. He did not have any way to know. What was waiting for him at the top of a staircase at a foundation gala an hour outside the capital, and the last 4 years of his life were about to end, in a way he had not prepared for, in a way he could not have prepared for, because the woman he was about to see was not the woman he remembered, and the woman he remembered had not existed for a long time, and he had not understood that yet, and he was about to. The car carrying Elena turned onto the long country road that led to the Belligori estate at 7:41. The sky had gone dark. The road was lined with cypress trees and low stone walls. Andre drove carefully, not fast. Luca sat in the passenger seat with his phone in his lap and the tracker signal visible on it. Elena sat in the back with her hands folded in her lap, and she looked out the window at the trees going past, and she thought, very quietly, to nobody in particular, "All right, all right, all right." The estate came into view at 7:52. Long driveway, stone gates, lanterns in the trees, a valet line of other cars. A red carpet that was not quite red but was the color of old wine rolled out from the main doors down to the gravel. The car stopped. A doorman opened Elena's door. She did not get out for a second. She sat. She breathed. She touched the earring once, just to feel it. She put on the face she had been practicing in mirrors for 6 weeks. A face that was not smiling but was not unsmiling. A face that was polite and distant and not afraid of anything. And she took the doorman's hand and she stepped out of the car in her black dress. And the doorman said, "Signora Ricci, welcome." And Elena Ricci, who had been many women in a short time, walked up the wine-colored carpet toward the open doors of the Belligori estate. And somewhere inside, on the other side of a crowded ballroom, at the top of a long staircase, a painting of a woman's back was hanging under a single spotlight, waiting for her. And somewhere else in the ballroom, a man with dark hair and a good suit and tired eyes was accepting a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and turning idly, because somebody had said something about the centerpiece, to look up at the top of the staircase. And he was about to see the painting for the first time, and he was about to see something in the painting that he could not quite place. And he was going to stand there, holding the glass of champagne, trying to work out what it was, while Elena Ricci, 40 feet behind him, crossed the threshold of the ballroom and began to walk, very slowly, toward the staircase, and the evening that would end his life as he had known it began. The ballroom of the Belligori estate had been built in 1912 for a family that did not exist anymore, and it had the ceilings those families built back then, high, painted, full of the kind of plasterwork no one alive still knew how to do. And tonight, every candle in every sconce was lit, and the whole room looked the way rooms look in the memories of people who have not been in such rooms in a long time, which is to say, it looked like a place where something was about to happen. Dante Moretti was standing near the bar with a glass of champagne he had not yet drunk, listening to a man from Switzerland talk about shipping insurance, when he looked up at the staircase. It was an accidental look. He had been looking past the Swiss man, the way men sometimes do at parties when a conversation is not holding them. And his eye had caught on the painting at the top of the stairs because the painting was the only thing in the entire ballroom that had a spotlight on it. And the spotlight was the kind of pale, cold white that gallery people used when they wanted a piece to command a room. And this piece was commanding the room. He looked at it for about 3 seconds before he understood what he was looking at. It was a painting of a woman's back. A woman in a long corridor walking away from the viewer. Dark hair, short, a dress the color of a bruise, almost black, not quite. The corridor was the kind of corridor that belonged in an old house. Wood floors, a long runner, wallpaper with a pattern in it that Dante could not quite make out from 40 feet away, and that, even if he had been able to make it out, he would not have consciously recognized, not yet, not at that distance. Not while a Swiss man was still talking to him about the cost of insuring a container ship through the Red Sea. But there was something about it. There was something about the shape of the shoulders, the way the dark hair sat on the neck, the way the woman held her hands, one down at her side, one lifted slightly, a hand that was walking, not carrying, a hand that was in motion. Dante stopped listening to the Swiss man. The Swiss man did not notice. The Swiss man kept talking. Dante lifted the champagne slowly and did not drink it. He was looking at the painting, and he was aware that he was looking at it, and he was aware that his chest had done something strange. And he did not know yet what the strange thing was, because his mind had not caught up to his body, and his body was telling him, very quietly, at a frequency he had not heard in 4 years, that something was wrong. "Excuse me," he said to the Swiss man, in the middle of a sentence about container ships. "Yes?" "Excuse me a moment." He set the champagne down on a passing waiter's tray without looking at the tray, and he walked, not quickly, toward the staircase. And he did not run into anyone on the way because people in rooms like this have a way of knowing when a man with that particular face wants the space in front of him cleared, and the space in front of him cleared. He stopped at the foot of the staircase and he looked up. He stood there for a long time. The painting was even stranger up close. The corridor in the painting, he could see the wallpaper pattern now, and the pattern was small gold fleur-de-lis on a cream ground, and his mouth had gone dry because the wallpaper in the long hallway on the second floor of the Moretti estate had been small gold fleur-de-lis on a cream ground for 90 years, and he had chosen that wallpaper personally when he had redone the house in the first year of his marriage. And there were perhaps 4 people in the entire world who knew what the wallpaper in that hallway looked like, and 3 of them worked for him. He looked at the card on the wall next to the painting. Elena, it said. The Long Walk. Oil on canvas. 2022. On loan from the collection of Giancarlo Pirovini. Elena. He did not move for almost a minute. He was not breathing quite right, and he was aware of this, and he was trying to correct it the way a man corrects his breathing when he does not want the people around him to see that he is not breathing quite right. His hand, which was at his side, had made a fist without him asking it to, and he uncurled it very slowly, finger by finger, because uncurling it fast would have looked like what it was, and he did not want to look like what it was. Mr. Moretti. He turned his head. The hostess of the foundation, a woman in her 60s with white hair and a black dress, was standing at his elbow with a small, warm, rehearsed smile. Signora Belagori, you are enjoying the piece. I am. Studying it. She is extraordinary. We are so lucky to have her tonight. She does not usually come to events. She was very specific about the arrangements. She is here tonight. She is walking up the carpet as we speak. She should be in the ballroom in a moment. We are holding the speeches until she arrives. Dante looked at Signora Belagori. His face did not change. His voice did not change. But inside his chest something had gone very quiet. And the quiet was not the quiet of a man who is calm. It was the quiet of a man who has just understood that the floor under his feet is not the floor he thought it was. And she is called Elena. Elena? Yes, just Elena. She does not use a last name professionally. Where is she from? Signora Belagori smiled a little wider. Mr. Moretti, I love you dearly, and your family has been very generous to our work, but I am not going to answer that question because Elena is very private, and I have promised her that she will not be asked questions tonight that she does not want to answer. If you would like to meet her when she comes in, I would be very happy to introduce you. But you will have to introduce yourself to her the way the rest of us do, which is as an admirer of the work. Of course. Wonderful. Signora Belagori drifted away. Dante stood at the foot of the stairs. Across the ballroom, a small commotion began at the main doors. Not a loud commotion. The Belagori Gala did not do loud commotions, but the specific quiet ripple that moves through a room of 300 people when somebody interesting has just walked in and the people nearest the door have turned their heads, and the people near those people have turned their heads, and the wave has started to spread. Dante turned, and Elena Ricci, who had been once a girl on a kitchen floor in the Corso district, and who had been once the silent wife in the Pearls, and who had been once a woman on a 3 a.m. bus going east with her forehead against a window, walked into the ballroom of the Belagori estate in a black dress that ate the light. And she did not look at the staircase, and she did not look at the painting, and she did not look at anyone in particular. And most of all, she did not look at her husband, who was standing at the foot of the staircase 40 feet away with his mouth slightly open and his hand opening and closing at his side. She did not see him. She had been told by Luca through a small earpiece she had put in the left ear an hour ago that Dante Moretti had arrived at 7:58 p.m. and was currently located at the foot of the main staircase, and that Luca and Andre were within 15 feet of her at all times, and that she could touch her earring whenever she wanted to leave. So she knew. She knew exactly where he was. She had known since she had stepped out of the car, but she did not look at him. She walked across the ballroom the way she had been practicing for 6 weeks in the mirror of her apartment in Porto Serra, which was not a practiced walk, but the walk of a woman who had nowhere in particular she needed to be, and who was not in a hurry to get there. And she let the ripple of the room spread in front of her, and she shook the hands of the people Signora Belagori brought to her, one after another, and she said, "Thank you, Signore," and "Thank you, Signora." And yes, I am very glad the painting is here tonight, and no, I am afraid I do not give interviews. And she did all of this at a distance of about 30 feet from Dante Moretti, without once turning her head. He watched her. He stood at the foot of the staircase and he watched her, and for the first minute he did not understand what he was seeing, because the woman across the ballroom was not the woman he was looking for in her. The woman he was looking for, Isabella, had long hair down her back and a softness in the line of her shoulders, and a particular way of holding her hands in front of her when she did not know what to do with them, which was most of the time because she had never, for the last 4 years of their marriage, known what to do with her hands. The woman across the ballroom had short hair. The woman across the ballroom was not soft in the line of her shoulders. The woman across the ballroom held her hands at her sides with the specific stillness of a person who had decided consciously that her hands would be still, and his eyes moved over her 3 separate times before he understood, the way a man understands a photograph he has been staring at, that what he was looking at was Isabella, his wife. He said her name very quietly, under his breath, without meaning to. Isabella. The man beside him, he did not know the man, just some banker from the capital, gave him a strange look. Dante did not notice. He started walking across the ballroom. He did not walk quickly. He had learned, over a long life, how to walk in rooms. But the walk was not his walk, not exactly. It was a walk with something slightly off in the knees. And the people who noticed him coming, there were several, because Dante Moretti was a face that people noticed in rooms like this, moved out of his way, and he crossed the ballroom in about 20 seconds. And he stopped approximately 8 feet from her, and he waited, because the woman she was speaking to had not finished a sentence, and he had enough manners left to wait. Elena did not turn her head. She finished her conversation with a man who was the cultural attaché of a small northern country. She thanked him. She turned finally, not toward Dante, but toward Signora Belagori, who was 2 steps to the right and who had just put a hand lightly on her elbow. Elena cara, may I introduce a very generous patron of the foundation, Mr. Dante Moretti. Elena turned her head. She looked at him. For exactly the length of time it took a person to draw one breath, her face was perfectly still. It was the face of a woman being introduced to a stranger. It was the face she had been wearing all evening to other men, to other collectors, to diplomats and industrialists, and people who might as well have been diplomats and industrialists for all the difference it made. It was a polite face. It was a distant face. It was not the face of a wife looking at a husband. And then she extended her hand. "Mr. Moretti," she said. "A pleasure." Her voice was not the voice he remembered. He had been braced, the way a man braces for a blow, for the voice of the girl on the kitchen floor, or for the voice of the silent wife, or for the voice of a woman screaming, which he had imagined in the worst hours of the last 4 years, more than once. Her voice was none of those. Her voice was the voice of a woman who did a thing professionally, and who had been doing it long enough to be a little tired of the cocktail portion of the evenings, and who was being polite to a stranger whose name she had just heard for the first time. He took her hand. Her hand was warm and steady. The bones of it were the same bones. He knew those bones. He had held that hand. But the hand itself was not the hand of the woman he remembered. The hand of the woman he remembered had been cool and had trembled slightly, and had always, at parties, been a little damp at the palm, because she had been nervous, because she had been always nervous, for 5 years. This hand did not tremble. This hand was not damp. This hand shook his hand once, firmly, and then let go, and went back to her side. "Elena," Signora Belagori said, "Mr. Moretti has been admiring the piece." "Has he?" "Very much so." "Thank you, Mr. Moretti. It is a piece I have a particular fondness for. I am glad it speaks to you." She said it without inflection. She said it the way a painter says such a thing to a stranger at a party. She said it with her eyes on his, and her eyes were the color of river stones, the way they had always been. But they were not the eyes he remembered, because the eyes he remembered had been tired, and these eyes were not tired. These eyes were alive. These eyes were looking at him with the precise, uninvolved attention a very good surgeon gives a patient she is about to operate on. "The corridor," he said. "Yes?" "It's familiar. Many corridors look alike." "Not this one." "No?" "Not this one," he said again. "The wallpaper." "Ah, the wallpaper. It is the wallpaper in a house I own." "Is it?" "Yes." She looked at him. She smiled, a very small, very polite smile, the kind of smile a painter gives to a collector when the collector has said something slightly silly. "Mr. Moretti, a great many houses in this country have that wallpaper. It is a very common pattern. I painted the corridor from a sketch I made 3 years ago in a hotel outside Lisbon." "Did you?" "Yes, in Lisbon." Yes, Mr. Moretti. In Lisbon. She held his eyes for one more second. Then she turned, very smoothly, to Signora Belagori, and she said, Margarita, I think the director wanted a word before the speeches. Would you take me to him? Of course, cara. Signora Belagori moved her slightly away from Dante. Elena did not look back. Dante stood in the middle of the ballroom with his hand still at his side, not quite closed, not quite open, and he watched his wife of 5 years, the woman he had slept next to for almost 2,000 nights, the woman whose pearls were still in a drawer in his dresser back in Verano City, walk away from him across a ballroom full of strangers. And he understood, standing there, with a clarity that was almost physical, that she had just lied to him about a painting, and that she had lied to him in a voice so calm and so unbothered that nobody in the room except him could possibly have known that she had lied, and that this was a thing she was capable of now, and that this was only the smallest of the things she was capable of now, and that the woman he had been looking for 4 years did not exist anymore, because she had been replaced by a woman who had looked him in the eye in a ballroom and told him that a painting of his own hallway had been sketched in a hotel in Lisbon, and that woman had not been lying, not exactly, because the woman who had painted the corridor was not the woman who had walked down it. The woman who had painted it was a different woman, and the different woman did owe him no memory and no truth and no hand at her side that trembled when he took it. He did not follow her. He stood where he was for a long moment. He looked down at his own hand. He flexed it once and uncurled it, and then he walked with some care back to the bar, and he ordered a whiskey, and he drank it slowly, and he thought. Elena, meanwhile, spoke to the director of the foundation for 90 seconds about nothing. Signora Belagori stood beside her. Luca was 4 feet away, pretending to look at a painting on the wall. Andre was near the ballroom door, watching the whole floor. You are all right, cara, Signora Belagori said quietly when the director had moved off. I am all right. He looked shaken. Yes, you know him. Margarita, I am not asking, I am saying. You know him. I saw it in your face for 1 second before you put it away. I have been running galas for 41 years, cara, and I know what 1 second of a face looks like. I will not mention it to anyone. I will not mention it to you again after this. But I am here, tonight, if you need me to be. Elena looked at her for a moment. Thank you, Margarita. The speeches began at 9. Elena stood at the top of the staircase for the speeches, next to the painting, with the spotlight on her and the spotlight on the painting, and the room below her quiet and turned up to her. Signora Belagori introduced her. The president of the foundation announced the acquisition fund, 100,000 euros a year for 3 years, for young female painters from the southern provinces, the Elena Fund, and there was a round of applause that went on longer than it was supposed to. And Elena stood at the top of the staircase with her hands folded in front of her, and she did not cry, and she did not smile too much, and she said, when the president handed her the microphone, exactly the 7 sentences she had prepared with Raphael on the Thursday afternoon, which were 7 sentences about the painters she had come up admiring, and about how the fund would work, and about the obligation artists owed, she believed, to the next artists. And she thanked the foundation, and she handed the microphone back, and the applause came again, and she stayed on the staircase for another 30 seconds, because Signora Belagori had told her to. And then she walked down the staircase, slowly, in the black dress, under the spotlight, and the room watched her come down. And she could feel Dante's eyes on her from the bar, and she did not look at him, not once. Not when she reached the bottom, not when she was greeted by 3 people in a row, not when Signora Belagori took her elbow and moved her toward the dining room for the seated dinner, not once, all the way across the ballroom and through the double doors. He found her after dinner. He had not approached her during dinner because dinner had been at a table of 8, and his seat had been at a different table, and he had sat through 3 courses without eating much, and he had watched her across the room through 2 centerpieces and a number of other heads, and he had waited. When the coffee service began and people started to drift, he got up from his table, and he crossed to hers, and he asked Signora Belagori politely if he might have a moment of Signora Elena's time, and Signora Belagori looked at Elena, and Elena, after a short pause, nodded once, and Signora Belagori said, Of course, Mr. Moretti, the library is available. It is quiet. Elena, cara, the library. They walked to the library. Luca followed at a distance. Andre moved to the library's second door, the one that opened into the hallway,
and stood there. Nobody spoke to Andre. Nobody was supposed to.
The library was a small, high-ceilinged room with 2 walls of books and a fire that had been lit, but had mostly burned down to embers, and it smelled like old paper and wax. The door Luca came through closed behind him with a soft click. Luca stood just inside the door, against the wall, with his hands clasped in front of him. "Who is he?" Dante said. "A friend of the house. He will stay." "I would prefer—" "Mr. Moretti. He will stay." Dante looked at Luca. Luca did not look at Dante. Luca looked at a spot on the wall above Dante's left shoulder, which was a look Dante had seen before. On Marco's face, on the faces of other men who had been paid to stand in rooms and watch other men, and Dante understood, looking at Luca, that this was a professional, and that the arrangement was not accidental, and that his wife had come to this gala prepared, and had come to this gala knowing he would be here, and that the last 45 minutes of his life had been, from her side, choreographed. He took a breath. "Isabella." "Not my name." "Isabella, please." "My name is Elena. If you would like to have this conversation, you will call me Elena." "That is not the name I married you under." "No. And that marriage is not the one we are discussing. We are discussing this evening, and my name this evening is Elena." She did not raise her voice. Her voice was the voice of a woman explaining to a man that the reservation was under a different name than he thought. He stood looking at her. "Where have you been?" "That is not a question I am going to answer." 4 years, Isabella. Elena. Elena. 4 years. I have looked for you. I know. I stopped. I know that too." He did not answer for a moment. "How do you know?" "Because if you had not stopped, Dante, you would have found me." He let that sit in the room. She was not wrong. He knew it. She was not wrong about it, and she had known the day it had happened, and she had understood what it meant. He did not know how she had known. He did not ask. He did not want to know which of his men had talked to which of her people, because it did not matter anymore, because he had called the search off 3.5 years ago. And she had known, and she had let him have the years since without sending anyone to look for him. And this, he understood, standing in the library with the coals almost out, was the actual shape of what had happened, which was that she had let him go. And he had not done her the same favor, and the difference between the two of them was that one of them had been willing to open the hand, and the other one had not. Isabella. "Elena, I am going to say something to you, and I am not going to ask anything of you. Will you listen?" "I will listen for 1 minute." "Thank you." He paused. He had thought, over 4 years, about this conversation. He had thought about it in the dark drawing room after Marco retired. He had thought about it alone at the long dining table. He had thought about it in his car and at his desk and in the shower and at 3 a.m. and at noon, and he had prepared, in his head, many versions of a speech that was meant to bring her back, a speech that was meant to make her understand what he had understood, a speech that was meant to carry across 4 years of silence the weight of everything he had not said while she had been in his house. Standing in the library, he realized the speech did not apply. The speech had been written for Isabella. The speech had been written for the woman in the pearls. The speech had been written for a woman who was not in this room, who would not be in any room ever again, because she had died over 6 years in a house in Verano City, and the woman in front of him had built herself out of the parts the other woman had left behind. And the speech he had prepared was in a language this woman no longer spoke. So he said instead, the only true thing he could think of, "I was wrong." She did not answer. "I was wrong for all of it, for the Paris dresses, for the pearls, for the dinners, for Vittoria, for the way I stopped looking at you. I was wrong for all of it, and I have known I was wrong for about 3.5 years, and I am telling you now because I do not think I will have the chance to tell you again." "No," she said. "You will not. I am not asking you to come back." "Good. I am not even asking you to forgive me. I know you are not. Even if you were, I would not. I know." She looked at him. Her face did not move. The embers in the fireplace popped once, very softly, and she did not look at the fire. "I have nothing to say to you, Dante." "No? No. I thought I would. I spent a long time in the first 2 years imagining what I would say to you if I ever saw you again. I had whole speeches. I had good ones. I had some very angry ones,
and I had some very cold ones, and I had one that was very calm, very clever, where I cut you to pieces in front of everyone you knew. I rehearsed them in my head when I could not sleep. And
I don't need any of them anymore. I don't want to cut you to pieces, Dante. I do not want to hurt you. I do not want to love you. I do not want to hate you. I looked at you, standing at the foot of that staircase an hour ago, and I understood that I do not want anything from you. And that was a very strange feeling because for a long time I wanted many things from you that I was not getting. And then for a long time after that I wanted other things from you that were harder to name. And now I want nothing. I feel nothing. I have nothing to say. The things you did to me, you did to a different woman, and that woman is not the woman standing in front of you. And the woman standing in front of you is not interested in discussing a person who is not her. Dante did not answer. She watched his face for a long moment. You wanted something dramatic, she said, more quietly. I know. I could see it on your face at the staircase. You wanted me to cry, or to slap you, or to tell you I had suffered, or to tell you I had not. You wanted a scene. A real one. You wanted to know what I had become. Because if I had become anything, it would have been a thing you could still measure yourself against. Even my anger would have been something. Even my hatred would have been something. I understand the appeal. That is not, yes, Dante. It is. And I am not going to give it to you. I'm going to give you nothing. Not because I am trying to punish you. I am not trying to punish you. Punishing you would be a kind of love. I do not love you. I have not, I think, loved you in a very long time, and I am sorry about that. And I hope someday you are sorry about it too. But I do not owe you my sorrow. I owe you nothing. She took one step toward him. Not close. Not too close. One step to adjust the angle so that she could look at him full in the face. You did not break me, Dante. I know that is what you will want in the years you have left to have believed. You did not break me. You did not even come close. You did not destroy me. You did not ruin me. You did not take anything from me that I could not replace. What you did was smaller than that. What you did was, for 6 years, you failed to see me. That is all. That is the whole thing. You failed to see your own wife in your own house, eating your own dinners, for 6 years, until one day I walked out in the rain with a bag, and you were surprised, and you spent 4 years trying to find me. And you never did. Because the woman you were looking for had not existed for a long time. That is the story, Dante. That is the only story there is. There is no betrayal in it. There is no villain. There is only a small man who did not bother to look up, and a woman who eventually got tired of not being looked at, and who went to find somebody who would, and the somebody turned out to be herself, which is the happiest ending I think a story like ours can have. Dante did not answer. He was looking at her with the expression of a man who had prepared for a fight and had arrived to find the other party had gone home. Isabella. Elena. Elena, he said very quietly. I'm sorry. Yes. I mean it. I believe you. Is there anything I can do? She almost laughed. It was not quite a laugh. It was a short, soft sound that started in her throat and did not finish. Dante! No, there is nothing you can do. That is the thing I am trying to tell you. You cannot undo what you did. You cannot make what you did smaller. You cannot buy me anything. You cannot find me anything. You cannot fix it. I am not broken, so there is nothing to fix. And that is not a gift to you. It is not something you can take any credit for. It is simply the outcome. The outcome, Dante. That is all. The outcome is that I am well, and you are not. And that is a consequence you will have to live with for the rest of your life. And I am not going to take it away from you, because it is not mine to take. It is the one true thing you will own for the rest of your life. And I think you need it more than you know. She stepped back. I'm going to leave this room now. I'm going to finish the evening. I'm going to fly home in the morning. You are not going to look for me again, not because I am asking you not to. I'm not asking anything of you, but because there is nothing to look for anymore. The woman you married is dead. You killed her, slowly, without meaning to. That is the one honest thing I can say to you, Dante, and I am saying it once and only once, and I will not say it again to anyone, including myself. I do not think you are a monster. I think you are a man, a small one. A small man who was given something precious and who did not know he had been given it and who lost it the way small men always lose things, which is by not noticing what they had. That is the whole story. I'm going to close the door on it now. I hope you find a way to live the rest of your life. I do not need you to. I am only saying I hope you do, because I would like to be the kind of woman who can hope that about the man who was her husband, and walk out of a room and mean it. She turned. She walked to the door. Luca opened it for her. At the threshold, she stopped. She did not turn her head all the way. She turned it about halfway, the way a person turns their head when they have remembered a small thing, and she said, in a voice so ordinary it almost hurt to hear, "Goodbye, Dante." And then she walked out. Luca followed. The door clicked shut. Dante Moretti stood in the library of the Belagori estate, alone, next to a fire that had burned down to nothing, and he did not move for a long time. The word goodbye sat on the air in front of him. It was a small word. It had been said many times by many people in every language he had ever heard spoken, but he understood standing there that he had not in his life been told goodbye the way he had just been told goodbye, because every other goodbye he had been a goodbye that was asking him for something, for mercy, for money, for an exception, for a second chance. And this goodbye had asked him for nothing, and the asking for nothing was the thing that had finally broken open the place in his chest that had been sealed for 4 years. And what came out of it was not anger, and was not grief exactly, and was not regret in the way he had understood regret. What came out of it was the simple, cold understanding that he had lost, and that he had lost a long time ago, and that the losing had been final, and that there was nothing he could do about it, and that there had not been for a long time anything he could do about it, and that everything he had done, including all the looking, had only made it truer. He sat down after a while in one of the wing-back chairs next to the dead fire. He put his face in his hands. He stayed that way for about 10 minutes. Nobody came in. Nobody disturbed him. Andre outside the hallway door had moved on because the thing he had been stationed for was over. Luca had gone with Elena. The library was his, alone, for as long as he wanted it. When he lifted his face, finally, his eyes were dry. He was not a man who cried. He had not cried at his father's funeral. He was not going to start now. He sat in the chair. He thought after a time about the photograph in his drawer at home, the girl on the kitchen floor, cobalt blue on her cheek. He understood very clearly that he was going to take that photograph out of the drawer tomorrow, and he was going to burn it in the fireplace of the drawing room, not because he wanted to destroy her, but because she was not his to keep anymore, and keeping her was the last of the things he had to let go of. He stood up. He straightened his tie. He walked out of the library. He did not look for her in the ballroom. She was not there. She had left the building. He understood that without needing to ask. He walked across the ballroom, past the bar, past the Swiss man from earlier, past 3 people who tried to greet him, and to whom he nodded without stopping. He collected his coat. He walked out of the Belagori estate into the October night, and he stood for a moment on the gravel with his hands in his coat pockets, and he looked up at the sky, and there were stars. And the stars did not care about him. His driver pulled up. He got in. The car drove back to the capital, and the next morning he flew back to Verano City, and he walked into his house, and he took the photograph out of the drawer, and he burned it in the drawing room fireplace as he had decided he would. And he did not cry while he did it, and he did not drink. And when it was done, he sat in the leather chair for a while, and then he got up, and he went to work. He was 45 years old. He was going to live another 30 years. He was going to do it alone. He understood that now. He had understood it, he thought, for some time. He had just needed to hear it in her voice, in a library, with a dead fire, before he could agree with himself that he knew. That was Dante's ending. It was not a happy ending. It was not a tragic ending. It was the ending of a man who had been given, once, the chance to love a woman well, and who had not taken the chance, and who now had to live the rest of his life inside the specific and quiet shape of that failure. And Elena had been right. It was a small story, in the end, and it was only the story of a small man, and she had walked out of it, and the story had stayed where she had left it, which was in a room in Verano City that nobody sat in anymore. Elena flew home to Porto Serra on the Sunday morning. Raphael drove her to the airport. Luca and Andre flew with her as far as the connection, and then they went back to the capital, and she took the second leg alone. She sat by the window. She watched the country go by underneath her. She did not think about the gala very much. She was tired, in the way a person is tired after a job finished correctly, and her mind was mostly on the painting she had been working on before she left, which was a painting of Katerina and Tommaso sitting together at a table in the framing shop, and she was trying to decide, sitting in the airplane, whether the light in that painting should come from the left, from the window, or from the right, from the door. And she had not yet decided, and she wanted to get home and look at the canvas again before she did. The plane landed. She took a taxi from the airport. The driver did not recognize her. Nobody at the airport had recognized her because Raphael had kept his promise, and there had been no photographs, and Elena's face was not a face that belonged to the public, and never would be. Katerina was waiting at the apartment. "How was the trip?" "It was fine." "Did you sell a painting?" "No, I did not sell a painting. I went to a gala." "A gala?" And it was fine, Katerina, it was fine. I am tired. I am going to make tea. Do you want tea?" "Yes." Elena made tea. They drank it at the small table in her kitchen, the south-facing window going gold in the afternoon light. And Katerina talked about her knees and about the new tenant in room 4 who was a student from the north who had left the bathroom a mess twice already. And Elena listened, and at some point, about halfway through the second cup, she realized that she was happy. It was not a dramatic happiness. It was a small one. It was the happiness of a kitchen that smelled like tea, and a friend who was complaining pleasantly, and a south-facing window, and a canvas on an easel in the next room with a problem on it she had not yet solved, and the particular quiet certainty that the thing she had been afraid of for 4 years was, as of the night before, no longer a thing that could reach her. He had looked at her, and he had seen her, and she had looked at him, and she had not needed him to see her, and that was the whole shape of it, which was a shape she had not known she had been walking toward all those years, but which she recognized now that she had arrived at it. If there was a thing to take from her story, a thing she would, years later, say to the young painters the Elena Fund would support, on the rare occasion she agreed to speak to them at all, it was not that leaving a cruel man was an act of courage, although it was, or that building a life from nothing was an act of will, although it also was. It was a smaller thing than either of those, and a harder one. It was that a person could spend years believing the thing wrong with their life was happening to them, when the thing wrong with their life was that they had stopped happening, themselves, to their own life, a long time before, and that the way out was not revenge, and was not forgiveness, and was not even escape, quite. The way out was the specific, quiet, daily work of starting again to be a person who took up room, who answered her own door, who painted a bad painting and then a less bad one, who cut her own hair in a bathroom at a pensione and looked at the result and liked it, and did not ask anyone whether she was allowed to. That was the only ending she had ever needed. She finished her tea. She said goodnight to Katerina at the door. She went into the studio, and she stood in front of the canvas of Katerina and Tommaso at the table in the framing shop, and she looked at it for a long moment, and then she understood all at once that the light should come from the right, from the door, because the door was where the customers came in, and the customers were the reason for the shop. And Tommaso's face was turned very slightly toward the door without him knowing he had turned it, and she picked up a brush, and she began to paint. Outside in Porto Serra, the sun went down. The gulls argued. The lights came on in the windows along her street. Somewhere 400 miles north, a man she had once been married to was eating dinner alone at a long table, and that was his life now. And it was not hers to think about anymore. And she did not think about it. She painted until midnight. Then she went to bed. She slept well.